The dog tag was still hot when Captain Sarah Vance found it, metal searing her palm even through the glove. It sat atop a flat rock in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by empty brass casings arranged in crude letters. Tritor, traitor, misspelled. Sarah's jaw tightened. Master Sergeant Frank Miller didn't make spelling mistakes. This was a message. She scanned the horizon through her rifle scope. The Devil's Anvil stretched endlessly, red rock canyons twisting like exposed veins under the Syrian sun. Then she saw them, 6 men in unmarked tactical gear, sweeping the ravines 3 clicks north. American weapons, no insignia. They weren't searching for a body, they were hunting. Sarah chambered around. They didn't kill you, Frank, but they're sure as hell trying to finish the job. 72 hours earlier, Sarah had sat in a briefing room at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, staring at a file that made her want to put her fist through the table. "Desertion under enemy fire," Colonel Harwick said, sliding the report across the desk. His tone carried the weight of a man who'd already made up his mind. Master Sergeant Miller abandoned his patrol 4 months ago during contact with hostiles, left 2 wounded men behind. Sarah's knuckles whitened around the folder. "That's not possible." "The facts say otherwise, Captain." She flipped through the pages. Radio logs showed Frank's last transmission cutting out mid-sentence. His GPS beacon went dark in a sector called the Devil's Anvil, a maze of red rock canyons along the Syrian border, where iron ore deposits turned navigation systems into expensive paperweights. The official narrative claimed panic, breakdown, cowardice. Sarah had known Frank Miller for 6 years. The man who'd taught her desert navigation didn't panic. He calculated. Every move deliberate, every word measured. "Permission to conduct a terrain survey in that sector, sir," she said, "for training purposes." Harwick's eyes narrowed. "The area's off limits. Which is why my soldiers need practice reading terrain without GPS." She kept her voice level, professional. "If we ever operate in contested zones, they'll need to know how to navigate using landmarks." The colonel studied her for a long moment. Then he signed the authorization form with a stroke that felt like a dare. 3 days, solo survey. You find anything that contradicts this report, you bring it directly to me. She stood, saluted, and walked out before he could change his mind. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and opened the last text Frank had sent her 5 months ago. "Trust the rocks. They don't lie." The Humvee's engine growled as Sarah pushed deeper into restricted territory. Dawn light painted the canyon walls in shades of rust and dried blood. Her GPS had started glitching 20 minutes ago, the screen flickering between coordinates like a dying heartbeat. She killed the engine at the mouth of a ravine too narrow for the vehicle. The silence hit like a physical force. No birds, no insects, just the tick of cooling metal and her own breathing inside the cab. Sarah grabbed her pack, 70 pounds of water, MREs, ammunition, and survival gear, and stepped into heat that felt like opening an oven door. The thermometer clipped to her vest read 43 Celsius. It was only 0700. She'd studied satellite imagery for 3 days straight, memorizing every wrinkle in this terrain. The Devil's Anvil earned its name, a labyrinth of slot canyons carved by flash floods that hadn't come in decades. Each passage a natural kill box where sound echoed off stone walls and turned firefights into chaos. Frank's last known position sat 12 kilometers northeast. On flat ground, an easy 3-hour march. Here, with the terrain forcing constant detours and climbs, she'd be lucky to make it by nightfall. Sarah checked her rifle, M4 with a COG scope, loaded and locked. Her sidearm rode high on her chest rig, easily accessible. She carried 6 magazines for the rifle, 3 for the pistol, hopefully 4 more than she'd need. The first 2 hours passed in brutal monotony. Climb, navigate, hydrate, repeat. The sun climbed with her, turning the canyon into a convection oven. Sweat soaked through her uniform in the first 30 minutes. By hour 2, salt crusted white on her sleeves. She found the first anomaly at 1000 hours, a cairn. 6 rocks stacked in a deliberate pyramid at a junction where 3 canyons met. Not natural, not local. She'd seen Frank build dozens just like it during training exercises. Sarah knelt beside it, scanning the surrounding walls through her scope. Nothing moved. She carefully dismantled the cairn and found what she was looking for. A message scratched into the bottom stone with a knife point. 3NE, 200 meters, water. 3 canyons northeast, 200 meters, water source. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Frank was alive, or had been when he'd left this marker. She rebuilt the cairn exactly as she'd found it and moved northeast, counting her paces. At 190 meters, she found the seep, a dark stain on the canyon wall where water trickled from a crack in the rock. Barely enough to fill a canteen in an hour, but in this hell, it was gold. And tucked into a crevice beside it, wrapped in a thermal blanket to protect it from the heat, was a water bottle, still half full. Sarah's hands shook as she picked it up. Duct tape wrapped the cap, and written on it in black marker, V, keep moving, they're watching. V, Valkyrie, her call sign. She spun, rifle up, scanning the canyon rims. Nothing but heat shimmer and stone. But Frank's warning made her skin crawl. Someone was out here. Someone who shouldn't be. She took a long drink from her own water, then poured half into Frank's bottle and left it where she'd found it. A signal, I'm coming. The second marker came 3 hours later, at the base of a slot canyon so narrow Sarah had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Another cairn. This one had a brass casing balanced on top. 5.56 millimeters, standard M4 round. She pocketed it and kept moving. The temperature had reached 48 Celsius. Heat radiated off the rock walls like they were alive and angry. Sarah's uniform clung to her skin, salt stiff and abrasive. She'd already gone through 2 liters of water. At this rate, she'd hit bingo fuel, the point of no return, in another 6 hours. The canyon opened into a natural amphitheater, a bowl of red stone 50 meters across. And there, in the center on a flat rock that caught the full fury of the sun, was Frank's dog tag. Sarah approached slowly, rifle up, scanning the rim. Still nothing, but her instincts screamed ambush. The tag was scorching hot when she picked it up. Miller, Frank J., blood type O positive. Protestant. The metal had discolored from the heat, the chain broken. Then she saw the shell casings, 43 of them, arranged in letters on the stone. Tritor. Traitor, she whispered, but Frank had misspelled it, missing an A. She crouched, studying the casings, all 5.56 millimeters, all from an M4. She picked one up, examined the primer. Recently fired, within the last week, maybe less. The brass still had oil residue. Frank was alive, and he was leaving her a trail. But why misspell the word? Frank had been a drill instructor. The man corrected privates' grammar in the middle of firefights. Unless... Sarah pulled out her notebook and wrote the letters vertically. Tritor. Then she circled the missing letter's position. The A should have been between the R and the I. Third position. She turned northeast, bearing 3 on the compass, and started moving. 30 meters later, she found the crevice. The crack in the canyon wall was barely visible, a shadow that looked like natural erosion. Sarah almost missed it, but there, wedged into the opening, was a thermal blanket covered in dust and pebbles, camouflaged so well it blended perfectly with the stone. She pulled it aside. Valkyrie. The voice was a rasp, barely human, but she'd know it anywhere. Master Sergeant Frank Miller sat wedged into a space no bigger than a coffin stood on end. His face was gaunt, skin burned dark and cracked like old leather. lips split and bleeding. His left leg stretched out at an unnatural angle, the tibia splinted with the stock of his broken M4. Jesus, Frank. Took you long enough. He tried to smile. It came out as a grimace. Got your message. The water. Sarah squeezed into the crevice beside him. The shade dropped the temperature 20 degrees, but it was still an oven. She pulled out her canteen and held it to his lips. He drank in small, controlled sips. Discipline even now. How long have you been here? In this hole? 3 weeks. Before that, moving every few days. His eyes were bloodshot but sharp. They left me, Sarah. My own men. After we found the trucks. What trucks? Frank reached into his vest and pulled out a small SD card wrapped in plastic. These trucks. Sarah took it, turned it over in her palm. What's on it? Insurance, documentation, photos of Colonel Harwick's private retirement fund. Frank's jaw clenched. We were doing a routine patrol in the northern sector. Found a convoy at an abandoned compound. 3 semis with Jordanian plates, sealed containers. I got curious. What was inside? Syrian antiquities, statues, pottery, goldwork, millions of dollars worth, looted from archaeological sites and being smuggled across the border. He coughed, the sound wet and painful. Harwick's been running it for 2 years, using patrol routes to move merchandise. The convoy drivers were contractors he hired personally. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. He found out you knew. My own LT radioed ahead while we were still at the site. By the time we got back to base, Harwick had already rewritten the mission report. Said we'd come under enemy fire. Made it look like I panicked and ran. Frank's hand tightened into a fist. Then he sent a cleanup crew. The men I saw on my scope. Black Shield's tactical. Private military contractors. Harwick's been using them to handle security for the shipments. When I realized what was happening, I grabbed my gear and disappeared into the Anvil. Figured the terrain would buy me time. And your leg? Week 2. I was moving at night, missed my footing in the dark. Fell 3 meters onto rocks. He tapped the makeshift splint. M4 didn't survive. I did. Barely. Sarah pulled out her satellite phone. I'm calling for extraction. Frank's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. You can't. Harwick monitors all comms traffic. The second you transmit, he'll know exactly where we are. And those contractors will be here in 30 minutes. Then what's the play? We move at night, get to the eastern edge of the Anvil, about 15 clicks from here. There's an old observation post the Army abandoned 5 years ago. It has a hardline comm system that Harwick doesn't control. We can reach the Inspector General's office directly from there. Sarah looked at his broken leg. You can't walk 15 clicks. No, but you can carry me. Frank, I know what I'm asking. His eyes locked onto hers. But if we don't get that evidence out, Harwick walks. And every soldier who trusted him becomes complicit in his crimes. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out her map and studied the terrain. Eastern edge. 15 clicks through slot canyons in the dark with a man who weighs, what, 200 pounds? 190. I've lost weight. Fantastic. She folded the map. We move in 4 hours when the sun drops. I'll scout the route ahead while you rest. But Frank, if those contractors are actively hunting us, we need to assume they have thermal optics. They do. I've been avoiding them for 3 weeks. He pointed to the thermal blanket. That's why I stay under cover during the day. At night, the temperature drop makes thermal imaging less effective. The rocks hold heat, create false signatures. And if they find us anyway? Frank reached behind him and pulled out a Beretta M9. The slide was locked back, magazine empty. Then we improvise. Sarah ejected her pistol magazine, thumbed off 6 rounds, and reloaded them into Frank's gun. 7 rounds. Let's hope we don't need them. Sarah spent the next 3 hours doing reconnaissance while Frank rested. She moved in expanding circles around their position, memorizing every boulder, every turn in the canyon walls. The heat was murderous, but she pushed through it, sipping water in measured amounts. At 1400 hours, she found the observation point she'd been looking for, a ledge 20 meters up the South Canyon wall with a clear view of the approaches. She climbed up, settled into a natural depression in the rock, and pulled out her scope. The contractors appeared at 1430, 6 men, moving in 2 teams of 3. They wore mismatched tactical gear, no uniforms, no insignia, but their movement was professional. Military veterans, definitely. They carried M4s with suppressors and high-end optics. The lead man had a tablet mounted on his chest rig, thermal scanner. Sarah watched them sweep the canyon floor methodically. They were good. They checked every crevice, every shadow. One of them even climbed up to investigate a shelf similar to where Frank was hiding. But they were searching 3 canyons west of Frank's position, still working a grid pattern, getting closer with every pass. At 1500 hours, they stopped for a water break. Sarah could hear fragments of their conversation echoing off the stone. 3 more sectors by nightfall. Boss wants this wrapped up. 10 grand bonus if we find him before dark. Then the lead contractor pulled out a satellite phone and made a call. Sarah couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. The man nodded several times, then pointed his team northeast, directly toward Frank's Canyon. Sarah slid down from her perch and moved fast, keeping to the shadows. She reached Frank's hiding spot with 20 minutes to spare. "We're blown," she said, pulling him to his feet. "They're coming this way." "How many?" "6. 2 clicks out and closing." Frank grimaced as weight settled onto his broken leg. "We won't outrun them, not in daylight." Sarah looked around the narrow canyon. Steep walls on both sides. Only 2 exits, the way she'd come in, and a slot passage to the north that was barely shoulder width. "Then we don't run," she said. She pulled out her map and traced the slot canyon. "This passage connects to the main wadi system. If we can get through before they reach this position, we can lose them in the maze. And if we can't," Sarah checked her rifle, "then we make them regret the career change." The slot canyon was a claustrophobic nightmare. Sarah went first, rifle slung across her back, using her hands to feel her way forward. Behind her, Frank shuffled sideways, using the walls for support. His breathing came in short, controlled gasps. Every few meters he had to stop, lean against the stone, let the pain pass. The passage narrowed to 18 inches at its tightest point. Sarah had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. Frank barely fit. His gear scraped against rock with sounds that echoed too loudly in the confined space. "Talk to me," Sarah whispered. "Keep your mind off the pain." "You mean keep me from passing out?" "That too." Frank was quiet for a moment, then, "Remember that navigation course in Arizona? You got lost on the second day." "I wasn't lost. I was taking the scenic route." "You missed 3 checkpoints and almost failed the entire evolution." "But I didn't." Sarah squeezed through another narrow section. "Because you came looking for me. Even though you could have let me wash out. You had potential. Just needed to learn that the map is a suggestion, not a cage. Sometimes the best route isn't the one they plan for you." "Is that what this is? You taking the scenic route?" "Something like that." His voice tightened with pain. "When I saw those trucks, I could have just reported it up the chain, done it by the book. But something felt wrong. The LT's reaction when I started asking questions. The way he got on the radio so fast. You trusted your instincts. And bought myself a broken leg and a death sentence." He laughed bitter. "Some instincts." Sarah stopped at a junction where the passage split 3 ways. She pulled out her compass, checked the bearing. "Your instincts kept you alive for 4 months in hell. That counts for something." She chose the left passage. Behind her, Frank's shuffling stopped. "Sarah." "Yeah?" "If we don't make it out, if those contractors find us, You take that SD card and you run. Don't look back. Not happening. That's an order, Captain. Sarah turned to look at him in the darkness. With all due respect, Sergeant, you're AWOL. You don't get to give me orders. Frank's teeth flashed white in the shadows. Still got that mouth on you. Learn from the best. They moved on. The passage began to widen, the walls pulling apart. Sunlight filtered down from above. They were approaching the main wadi system. Sarah could hear water trickling somewhere ahead, the seep she'd found earlier. Then she heard something else. Voices. Close. Sarah froze. Behind her, Frank went still. They were still 20 meters from the exit, trapped in the slot with no room to turn around. The voices grew louder. 2 men, maybe 3, approaching the wadi from the opposite direction. Sarah unslung her rifle as quietly as she could. The space was too narrow to aim properly, but if it came to it, she could fire from the hip. Behind her, Frank drew his pistol. The footsteps stopped right at the passage entrance. "Check this slot," a voice said, American accent. "I want every crack searched." Sarah's finger moved to her trigger. She could see a shadow in the sunlight ahead. One man, leaning into the passage, probably trying to decide if it was worth crawling into. Frank's hand touched her shoulder. 3 taps. Wait. The shadow shifted. Too narrow. Nothing's getting through there. You sure? Unless the target lost 100 pounds and learned to turn sideways. Laughter. Then the footsteps moved away, heading south along the wadi. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Frank's hand stayed on her shoulder, steady despite the pain she knew he was in. They waited 5 more minutes. Then Sarah moved forward, inch by careful inch, until she reached the passage exit and could see the wadi. Empty. The contractors had moved on. She helped Frank out into the open. His face was gray with pain, sweat running in rivers despite the dry heat. "How far to the observation post?" he asked. Sarah checked her GPS, still glitching, but functional enough for a rough estimate. 12 clicks, but the terrain... I know, we'll need all night. He looked up at the sun, still high in the cloudless sky. We've got 4 hours until dark. We should rest while we can. They'll keep searching. Let them. The Anvil is 60 square kilometers of mazes. We play it smart. Stay quiet. We can avoid them. He pointed to an overhang 30 meters up the wadi. That'll give us shade and a view of the approaches. We wait there until sundown. Sarah wanted to argue. Every instinct said keep moving, put distance between them and the hunters. But Frank was right. Pushing through the heat would kill him faster than the contractors. They made their way to the overhang and settled in to wait. Sarah kept watch while Frank drank water and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into something that wasn't quite sleep, but close to it. The body's way of conserving energy. Sarah checked her ammunition. 6 magazines for the rifle, 30 rounds each. 3 magazines for her pistol, 15 rounds each. Frank had 7 rounds in his Beretta. Total, 232 rounds between them. Against 6 trained contractors with unlimited ammunition and support from a corrupt colonel. The math wasn't great, but she'd worked with worse odds before. The sun finally started its descent at 1800 hours, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and crimson that looked like dried blood. The temperature dropped 5 degrees, then 10. By the time full darkness fell at 1930, it was almost cool, only 30 Celsius. Sarah shook Frank awake gently. He came to instantly, no grogginess. Old military habit. "Time to move," she said. They started east, using the darkness as cover. The plan was simple. Follow the wadi system as far as it went, then cut through the canyons using natural landmarks Sarah had memorized. 12 kilometers, maybe 7 hours at Frank's pace. The first hour went smoothly. The wadi floor was relatively flat, easy terrain. Frank used a branch Sarah had found as a makeshift crutch, taking weight off his broken leg. They moved in silence, communicating with hand signals. Hour 2 brought the first complication. The wadi ended at a rockfall. Boulders the size of cars piled 20 feet high. No way around. They'd have to climb over. Sarah went first, testing each handhold. Then she reached down and pulled Frank up, one painful meter at a time. His teeth were clenched so hard she could hear them grinding, but he never made a sound. At the top, he collapsed, breathing hard. 2 minutes, Sarah said. She scanned their back trail with her night vision monocular. No movement, no lights. The contractors were either bedded down for the night or searching other sectors. Frank pushed himself back to his feet. Let's go. Hour 3 brought rain. It started as a few scattered drops, then built to a steady drizzle. In any other environment, it would have been a blessing. Here, it was a curse. The rock became slick, treacherous. Every step risked a fall that could finish what Frank's broken leg had started. They slowed to a crawl, testing each foothold twice. The rain soaked through their uniforms, chilling them after the day's heat. Sarah's hands went numb. Frank started shivering. Keep moving, she urged. Body heat. Trying. Hour 4 brought the lights. Sarah saw them first. 3 points of illumination sweeping the canyon behind them, maybe a kilometer back. Flashlights. The contractors were doing a night sweep after all. They're persistent, Frank muttered. They're getting paid. Sarah checked her map again. We're 4 clicks from the observation post. But there's a problem. What? The terrain funnels us through a box canyon up ahead. Only one way through. If they know this area, they can get ahead of us and set up an ambush. Yeah. Frank was quiet for a moment, watching the lights behind them. Then he said, You need to leave me. Not this again. Listen to me. They're tracking our pace. They know I'm injured. If you leave me with enough ammunition and take the SD card, you can move 3 times faster. Reach the observation post. Make the call. And you die here? I was dead the moment I found those trucks. His voice was matter-of-fact. At least this way the evidence gets out. Sarah turned to face him fully. When I was a second lieutenant, fresh out of OCS, I thought I knew everything. First deployment, I made a call that got 2 soldiers wounded. My fault. My bad judgment. You could have written me up, destroyed my career. You know what you did instead? That's not. You sat me down and told me that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about making hard calls with incomplete information and living with the consequences. And you said the real test of a leader is whether they abandon their people when things go wrong. She pointed back at the lights. So here's my hard call, Frank. We move together. We fight together. And if it comes to it, we die together. But I don't leave soldiers behind, not even when they order me to. Frank stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You're a pain in the ass, Valkyrie. Learn from you. They kept moving. The rain stopped after 30 minutes, but the damage was done. They'd lost precious time on the slick terrain. The lights behind them grew closer. Hour 5 brought the canyon. It opened before them like the throat of some massive beast, walls rising 40 meters on both sides. 100 meters long, a perfect ambush point. Sarah studied it through her night vision. Nothing moved, but that meant nothing. Good ambushes didn't advertise. We could try to go around, Frank said. Add maybe 2 hours. Sarah looked back. The lights were less than half a click behind now. We don't have 2 hours. Then we run the box? We run it smart. She pulled out a flare from her pack. When we're halfway through, I'm going to pop this flare and throw it behind us. Anyone watching will think we're further back than we are. Might buy us a few seconds of confusion. And if they're waiting in the canyon? Sarah chambered around in her rifle. Then we find out if they're really worth $10,000. They entered the box canyon side by side. Sarah on the left, Frank on the right, despite his limp. The walls pressed in, swallowing sound. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Every shadow could hide a gun. Every rock could conceal an enemy. 20 meters in, nothing. 40 meters, still clear. Halfway through, Sarah pulled the pin on the flare and hurled it back toward the entrance. It ignited mid-flight, brilliant red light washing across the stone. She didn't wait to see the effect. She grabbed Frank's arm and pulled him forward in a stumbling run. They'd made it another 10 meters when the first shot cracked out. Not from inside the canyon, from behind them at the entrance. The contractors had been following their trail the whole time, and the flare had just pinpointed their position. "Move!" Sarah shoved Frank ahead and spun, bringing her rifle up. She could see three silhouettes backlit by the flare. She fired twice, fast, suppressive fire to keep their heads down. Then she turned and ran. More shots. Rounds sparked off stone, the impacts deafening in the enclosed space. Frank stumbled, caught himself, kept moving. Sarah could see the end of the canyon 30 meters ahead. 20 meters. Something hot kissed Sarah's shoulder. She felt the impact more than the pain. Rounds struck her plate carrier, ceramic absorbing the energy. She staggered but stayed on her feet. 10 meters. They burst out of the canyon into open ground. Sarah grabbed Frank and pulled him right, putting a boulder between them and the shooters. She dropped to one knee, rifle up, covering their exit. Three contractors appeared at the canyon mouth. Sarah fired 3 times. One man dropped, hit in the leg. The other 2 dove for cover. "Go!" she shouted to Frank. "The observation post is half a click northeast. Run!" "Not without, that's an order, Sergeant." Frank hesitated for one precious second. Then he turned and limped into the darkness, moving as fast as his broken leg would allow. Sarah lay down covering fire, carefully aimed shots to keep the contractors pinned. Her rifle clicked empty after the 6th shot. She dropped the magazine, slammed in a fresh one, kept firing. One of the contractors tried to flank left. Sarah put 2 rounds near his feet. He retreated. The wounded man was being dragged back into the canyon by his partner. Then she heard it. Engines. Vehicle engines, getting louder. The rest of the contractor team coming with reinforcements. Time to go. Sarah turned and ran, following Frank's trail. She caught up to him 200 meters later, breathing hard. 3 left behind us, she gasped. At least 3 more coming in vehicles. The observation post? 300 meters. If we can get inside, bar the door. It's a concrete bunker. They'll siege us. You have a better idea? Frank didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. They were out of options. The only question now was whether they could make the call before the contractors broke through. They covered the last 300 meters in 5 agonizing minutes. The observation post appeared ahead. A squat concrete structure half buried in the hillside, surrounded by rusted chain-link fence. The gate hung open, broken years ago. Sarah kicked in the door and pulled Frank inside. The interior smelled of dust and decay, broken furniture, shattered glass, and in the corner, mounted on the wall, a field telephone with a hardline connection running underground. She grabbed the handset. Dead. No! She traced the line to the junction box. Someone had cut the cables, recently. The copper ends were still bright. Frank slumped against the wall. Harwick. He knew about this place, knew we'd run here. Sarah felt the trap closing around them. He's been 3 moves ahead the whole time. Outside, engines grew louder, then stopped. Doors slammed. Voices called out in the darkness, surrounding the bunker. "Captain Vance!" The voice came through a bullhorn, calm and professional. "Master Sergeant Miller, you're surrounded. Throw out your weapons and come out peacefully. Nobody else has to get hurt tonight." Sarah looked at Frank. He looked back. Then he reached into his vest and pulled out the SD card. "Here's the play," he said quietly. "You take this. When they breach, you run. There's a back entrance in the next room, maintenance hatch. It comes out 50 meters upslope. You run, you don't stop, and you get this evidence to someone who can use it. Frank, I'll hold them here. Give you the time you need. With 7 rounds? I've done more with less." He pressed the SD card into her palm. Sarah, Valkyrie, You're the best officer I ever trained. Don't waste that by dying here with me." Sarah looked at the card, then at Frank, then at the door where footsteps were approaching. She'd been given a direct order by a superior she trusted with her life. For the first time in her career, she decided to disobey. "New plan," she said, and started pulling equipment from her pack. "We both walk out of here." Sarah pulled out everything she had left: 2 smoke grenades, 1 fragmentation grenade, a claymore mine she'd been carrying for emergencies, and 12 feet of det cord wrapped around a block of C4. "What's the plan?" Frank asked, watching her work. "They expect us to either surrender or die here. We're going to do neither." She started rigging the claymore to the door, angling it to spray the entrance with ball bearings. "When they breach, this buys us 10 seconds. We use the back hatch, get to high ground, and disappear into the terrain before they reorganize." "And the evidence?" Sarah held up the SD card, then tucked it into a waterproof pouch and secured it inside her vest. "Goes where I go." Outside, the bullhorn crackled again. "You have 2 minutes to respond. After that, we're coming in." Frank checked his Beretta, then positioned himself by the door to the back room. "I can't run, Sarah, you know that. This leg." "You're going to have to." She finished wiring the claymore and moved to the back room. The maintenance hatch was there, just as Frank had said. A rusted metal door set into the floor, secured with a padlock that looked older than she was. She put 2 rounds into the lock. It shattered. The hatch opened onto a concrete tunnel sloping upward. Maintenance access from the old days when this post had been active. It stank of mold and stagnant water. 60 seconds, the voice outside announced. Sarah pulled the pin on both smoke grenades and tossed them into the main room. Gray smoke began billowing immediately, filling the space. She grabbed Frank's arm. "Down the tunnel, now!" They descended into the darkness. Behind them, smoke poured down after them like a living thing. Sarah could hear voices shouting outside, confused by the smoke suddenly venting from the bunker's air vents. The tunnel was narrow, forcing them to move single file. Water dripped from the ceiling, and their boots splashed through puddles that smelled of rust and decay. Frank used the walls for support, half hopping, half dragging his broken leg. Behind them, a massive boom shook the tunnel. The claymore had triggered. Men screamed. Then came the distinctive crack, crack, crack of rifle fire, the contractors shooting at smoke and shadows. Sarah and Frank kept moving. The tunnel climbed at a steep angle. Her thighs burned. Frank's breathing came in ragged gasps behind her. The tunnel ended at another hatch. Sarah pushed it open carefully, scanning for threats. They emerged on the hillside 50 meters above the bunker, hidden in a cluster of boulders. Below, she could see muzzle flashes and the glow of fires. The smoke grenades had ignited something inside the bunker. 5 contractors clustered near the entrance, 1 man down and bleeding from the claymore. 2 more were running toward vehicles parked 100 meters away, probably going for medical supplies. "Move while they're distracted," Sarah whispered. They scrambled upslope, using the rocks for cover. Every few seconds, Sarah glanced back. The contractors were still focused on the bunker, thinking their targets were trapped inside. But it wouldn't last. Soon they'd realize the smoke was a diversion. Soon they'd find the tunnel. Sarah and Frank crested the hill and dropped into a wadi on the far side. For the moment, they were out of sight. "How's the leg?" Sarah asked. Frank's face was gray. "Still broken. Can you keep moving? Do I have a choice?" They pushed northeast, following the high ground. The observation post fell away behind them, smoke still rising from its entrance. Sarah checked her compass. The nearest road was 8 clicks away. If they could reach it before dawn, flag down a passing patrol. A flare shot into the sky behind them, brilliant white light turning night into day. The contractors had found the tunnel. They ran. Or rather, Sarah ran, and Frank hobbled as fast as his broken leg would allow, using her shoulder for support. Behind them, voices shouted coordinates. Flashlight beams swept the hillside. "They're organizing a sweep line," Frank gasped. "Standard search pattern. They'll spread out and walk us down. Then we don't run in a straight line." Sarah pulled him left, into a cluster of boulders. "We break their line of sight, change direction, force them to reset." They zigzagged through the terrain, using every piece of cover. Twice, flashlight beams passed within meters of their position. Twice, Sarah held Frank still and quiet until the searchers moved on. But the contractors were good. They maintained discipline, kept their spacing, worked the ground methodically, and with 6 men, minus the one casualty, they could cover a lot of terrain. An hour into the pursuit, Sarah heard a sound that made her stomach drop. Helicopter rotors. She looked up and saw it silhouetted against the stars. A civilian bird, probably chartered from the same company that owned the contractors. It came in low, spotlight blazing, sweeping the ground in wide arcs. "They brought air support," Frank said. "Harwick's not taking chances. We need hard cover, something the thermal can't penetrate." Sarah scanned the terrain. Most of the rock was too thin, the wadis too exposed. Then she saw it. 100 meters north, a section of cliff face that looked darker than the surrounding stone. A cave, maybe, or a deep overhang. "There," she pointed. "Can you make it?" "Watch me." They sprinted across open ground. The helicopter was sweeping south, its spotlight tracking along a parallel wadi. Any second it could turn, catch them in the open. 50 meters. The helicopter's rotors changed pitch. Turning. 25 meters. The spotlight swept toward them. They dove into the shadow of the cliff just as the light washed across the ground they'd been standing on. Sarah pressed Frank deep into the darkness and didn't move, didn't breathe. The helicopter hovered for a long moment, spotlight probing the rocks. Then it moved on, continuing its search pattern. Sarah finally let herself breathe. She pulled out her flashlight and risked a quick look around. They were in a natural alcove, maybe 3 meters deep and twice that wide. Not quite a cave, but enough to hide them from aerial thermal. The back wall had ancient petroglyphs carved into it, stick figures and animals, thousands of years old. "We hold here until the helicopter moves on," she said. "Then we keep moving." Frank slumped against the wall, finally allowing himself to show the pain. His makeshift splint had shifted during the run. Sarah could see bone pressing against skin at an unnatural angle. "Let me look at that," she said. "It's fine." "Frank, it's fine, Captain." His voice was harder than necessary. "We don't have time for field medicine. Just give me 2 minutes to catch my breath." Sarah wanted to argue, but he was right. Every second they stayed still was a second the contractors closed in. She moved to the alcove entrance and kept watch. The helicopter made 3 more passes over the next 30 minutes, each time coming closer. The searchers on the ground had spread out, creating a net. Sarah could see their flashlights moving in coordination, systematically clearing each section of terrain. "They're going to find us," Frank said quietly. "You know that." "Not if we move smarter than they do." "Sarah, be realistic. I can barely walk. You're low on ammunition. And they have a helicopter, thermal imaging, and professional training. The math doesn't work." She turned to look at him. "You ready to quit?" "I'm ready to be practical. You still have time to slip through their cordon. Alone, in the dark, you could make it. Get that evidence to—" "Shut up, Frank." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said shut up. I'm tired of you trying to play martyr. We're in this together, and we're getting out together. End of discussion." "I'm trying to save your life." "And I'm trying to save yours. So how about you stop wasting breath on speeches and start thinking tactically? You're the best desert fighter I know. How do we beat 6 contractors and a helicopter?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across his cracked lips. "You remember the Battle of Takur Ghar? Afghanistan, 2002. SEALs held a mountain against superior numbers. They didn't win by running. They won by controlling the high ground and making the enemy come to them on their terms. He pointed northeast. 3 clicks from here, there's a mesa. Flat top, steep sides, only 2 ways up. If we can reach it before dawn, we own the battlefield. With what? We have maybe 150 rounds between us. We don't need to win a firefight. We need to last until morning. Frank's eyes gleamed with the old tactical fire she remembered from training. Daylight means air traffic, military helicopters running drills. We get to high ground, we light off a flare, and suddenly Harwick's private contractors have to explain why they're shooting at U.S. Army personnel. Sarah thought it through. It was insane, but it was also the first plan that didn't end with one of them dead. 3 clicks, she said. How long? At my pace, 2 hours. Maybe less if I can rig a better crutch. The helicopter will spot us. Not if we time it right. It has to refuel eventually. We watch for the pattern, wait for it to head back to base, then we move during the gap. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than nothing. They waited another 40 minutes, tracking the helicopter's movements. Sarah timed each pass, 12 minutes sweeping the search area, then a 15-minute gap while it presumably refueled and repositioned. Not much, but enough. When the rotors faded into the distance at 0200, they moved. The terrain was brutal, loose scree that shifted underfoot, forcing them to test each step. Twice, Frank's weight caused small rock slides that sounded like thunder in the stillness. Each time they froze and waited, certain the contractors had heard. But the searchers were still focused on the area around the observation post, working outward in expanding circles. Sarah and Frank were moving perpendicular to the search pattern, slipping through the gaps. 1 click covered. Frank's breathing was ragged, each step accompanied by a barely suppressed grunt of pain. Sarah had fashioned him a better crutch from a dead juniper branch, but it only helped so much. The helicopter returned at 0225, right on schedule. They were crossing open ground when they heard the rotors. Sarah pulled Frank behind a boulder barely large enough to hide them both. The spotlight passed 30 meters to their south. Too close, Frank whispered. Next gap, we sprint. Get to the mesa base before they come back. 2 clicks. The mesa rose before them now, a dark mass against the stars. Sarah could see why Frank had chosen it. The sides were nearly vertical, maybe 60 degrees, loose rock and hard climbs. Any assault would be slow and exposed, but first they had to reach it. The helicopter departed at 0235. They had 15 minutes. Go, Sarah said. They covered the last kilometer in 12 minutes, arriving at the mesa's base with 3 minutes to spare. The climb loomed above them, 40 meters of loose rock and questionable handholds in the dark. I'll go first, Sarah said. Find the route, then I'll pull you up. Sarah, save your breath for the climb. She started up. The rock was treacherous, shifting under her weight. Twice she nearly fell, catching herself at the last second. But she'd done worse climbs in training. She focused on the handholds, on breathing, on the burning in her forearms. 20 meters up, she found a ledge wide enough to brace herself. She pulled out her rope, 30 feet of paracord, not rated for climbing, but better than nothing. She tied one end to a solid rock protrusion and dropped the other end down to Frank. Tie around your chest, she called down softly. I'll haul you up. Frank secured the rope and started climbing. Sarah pulled from above, taking some of his weight. His broken legs scraped against the rock face, and she heard him bite back a scream. 10 meters. 20. Almost there. Then they heard it, the helicopter returning, ahead of schedule. Don't stop, Sarah hissed. Keep climbing. The spotlight appeared over the ridge to the south. Sweeping toward them, Frank was 5 meters from the ledge. 4. 3. The light caught them. Contact, a voice shouted from below. 2 targets on the mesa, southeast face. Sarah grabbed Frank's vest and pulled with everything she had. He scrambled over the ledge just as rifle fire cracked out. Rounds sparked off the rock below their position. Move! Sarah pushed Frank ahead and followed, scrambling up the last 20 meters to the mesa top. More rounds impacted around them, but the angle was bad. The shooters were directly below, firing almost straight up, and the rock face provided cover. They collapsed onto the flat top of the mesa, breathing hard. The helicopter circled, searching for a landing zone, but the top was too cluttered with boulders. It couldn't set down. "They'll have to climb," Frank said. "Same as us." Sarah did a quick survey. The mesa top was roughly 50 meters across, scattered with rocks and scrub brush. Two ways up, the face they just climbed, and a slightly easier slope on the north side. Both were death traps if properly defended. She pulled out her rifle and checked the magazine. 40 rounds left. Frank had his Beretta with 7 rounds. Not much, but positioned right, they could make every shot count. "Set up here," she said, pointing to a cluster of rocks that gave them sight lines to both approaches. "Controlled fire. Make them pay for every meter." Frank positioned himself behind the rocks, Beretta ready. Sarah took the rifle and moved to a flanking position. Below, she could see flashlights gathering at the mesa base. The contractors were organizing their assault. The helicopter made another pass, spotlight blazing. A loudspeaker crackled. "Captain Vance! Master Sergeant Miller! There's nowhere left to run. Come down now and nobody else gets hurt." Frank laughed, bitter and hard. Nobody else. Like they're doing us a favor. Sarah watched the contractors through her scope. 6 men, no, 5 now, after the Claymore casualty. They were splitting into 2 teams, one for each approach. Professional, disciplined. They'd done this before. "Here they come," she said. The first assault came up the southern face at 0300. 3 contractors moving in a tight formation, covering each other, using fire and movement. Good tactics. Sarah let them get halfway up before she fired. The lead man dropped, hit in the leg. Not a kill shot, but it didn't need to be. He tumbled backward, taking the climber below him down in a tangle of limbs and curses. The third man flattened against the rock face, pinned down. "First team stalled," Frank called from his position. "Second team moving on the north slope." Sarah shifted position, crawling through the rocks to get a view of the north approach. 2 contractors, moving slower but steadier than the first team. She sighted on the lead man and squeezed the trigger. Miss. The round sparked off rock a foot to his right. She adjusted and fired again. This time she hit him in the shoulder. He fell back, clutching the wound. Return fire raked the mesa top. Rounds cracked overhead, ricocheting off stones. Sarah ducked low and moved to a new position. Never stay in one spot after firing. Basic sniper doctrine. The contractors regrouped at the base. From her elevated position, Sarah could see them treating their wounded, reorganizing. They'd learned the price of a direct assault. "They'll try something different next time," Frank said. "Suppressive fire while they climb, maybe. Or they wait for daylight, make it a siege." "How much water do we have left?" Sarah checked her canteen. Half full, maybe a liter. Frank's was nearly empty. Not enough for a long siege. "Then we make them come to us before they figure that out." For the next hour, nothing happened. The contractors held position at the base. The helicopter continued its circling pattern, keeping them under surveillance. Sarah used the time to redistribute ammunition and scout the mesa top for any advantages she'd missed. She found 2 things of interest: a pile of old surveying equipment left by whoever had built the observation post decades ago, and a natural depression at the northern edge that collected rainwater. Currently empty, but it showed the mesa top got precipitation. At 04:15, Frank called out softly, "They're moving again." Sarah returned to her position. This time, all 5 contractors were climbing together. 2 teams coordinated to hit both approaches simultaneously. And they had a new tactic: smoke grenades. Gray smoke billowed up the cliff faces, obscuring Sarah's sightlines. Smart. She fired into the smoke anyway, aiming for where she estimated the climbers would be. Heard a cry of pain. But she couldn't confirm hits. Frank fired 3 times from his position, the Beretta's report sharp in the still air. Then, "I'm dry! Fall back to my position!" Sarah kept firing controlled bursts into the smoke. She was down to 20 rounds in her current magazine. Frank hobbled over, moving painfully slow. "They're almost to the top." Sarah pulled the pin on her fragmentation grenade, her last one, and threw it toward the south approach. It detonated with a flat crack, shrapnel pinging off rock. Someone screamed, but the north approach was clear. A contractor's head appeared over the edge. Sarah fired twice. Both misses. He ducked back, but he'd seen their position. "They know where we are," Frank said. "Then we relocate." Sarah grabbed Frank's arm and pulled him toward the center of the mesa, where a cluster of large boulders formed a natural fortress. They made it with seconds to spare before the contractors topped the rim and began pouring fire into their previous position. 3 contractors on the mesa now. Sarah could see them through gaps in the rocks, moving tactically, using cover. They knew they had the advantage: numbers, ammunition, and time. Sarah had 11 rounds left in her rifle. "We're not making it to daylight, are we?" Frank said quietly. "Not here, not like this." Sarah pulled out her map and studied it by moonlight. Then she saw it, a notation she'd missed before. "Frank, the northwestern edge. What's that drop-off?" "Cliff face, 100-meter fall into a box canyon." "And the canyon connects to?" "The Wadi system, 4 clicks from the main road. So if we could get down that cliff, we'd have a straight shot to extraction. But Sarah, it's a 100-meter rappel. At night, with a broken leg and no proper gear. You have a better plan?" He looked at the contractors closing in, then back at her. "When you put it that way." Sarah pulled out her remaining paracord, 60 feet total. Not nearly enough for a 100-meter descent, but enough to get them started. After that, they'd have to free climb or jump the last sections. The contractors were 30 meters away and closing, moving from cover to cover. "We go now," Sarah said, "before they box us in completely." They scrambled toward the northwestern edge, keeping low. Behind them, the contractors saw the movement and opened fire. Rounds cracked overhead. One caught Frank's pack, shredding the fabric. The cliff edge appeared suddenly, a black void dropping away into nothing. Sarah looked down and saw stars. The canyon floor so far below it felt like looking into space. "Rope up," she said, securing the paracord to a boulder. "Sarah, this is insane." "You said it yourself. We need to control the terms of engagement. Down there, they can't use their numbers against us. It becomes a foot race, and we're motivated." Frank smiled despite everything. "You're crazier than I am. I learned from the best." She tied the rope around Frank first, then started lowering him down. The paracord stretched alarmingly. Frank's weight put it near the breaking point, but it held. 20 feet down, 30. The rope ran out at 60 feet. Frank found a ledge and untied himself. Sarah dropped the rope back up. A contractor appeared at the cliff edge above, rifle raised. Sarah fired her last 3 rounds. The man ducked back. She tied the rope around herself and dropped over the edge. The free climb was worse than anything she'd experienced in training. In the dark, every handhold was a gamble. Loose rock crumbled under her fingers. Twice her foot slipped, leaving her hanging by her arms, heart pounding, certain she was about to fall. But she made it to Frank's ledge. Above them, flashlight beams probed the cliff face. "They're not following," Frank said. "Too risky in the dark. They'll wait for light and then come down the easy way. We need to be long gone by then." Below the ledge, the cliff continued its brutal descent. Sarah could see a series of ledges stair-stepping down, maybe climbable. Maybe. "Can you make it?" she asked Frank. He looked at his broken leg, then at the drop below. "Guess we'll find out." They descended in stages. Sarah would climb down first, find the safest route, then talk Frank through it. Each ledge was 5 to 10 meters below the last. Some required jumping, landing hard, and hoping the rock held. Frank fell twice. The first time, Sarah caught him. The second time, he tumbled 8 feet before catching himself on a boulder. She heard something crack, a rib, maybe, or his already broken legs shifting again. But he kept going. No complaints, no stopping, just pure, stubborn will. 70 meters down, then 80. At 90 meters, Sarah's foot found flat ground. They were down. She collapsed against the canyon wall, every muscle screaming. Frank landed beside her moments later and didn't move for a full minute. Above, the sky was turning gray. Dawn was coming. 4 clicks to the road, Sarah said, her voice hoarse. Can you walk? Frank pushed himself upright. His face was a mask of pain, but his eyes were clear. I've come this far. I'll make it. They started moving through the canyon. Behind them, the mesa rose like a dark monument. At its top, Sarah could see the tiny lights of flashlights. The contractors, probably just now realizing their targets had escaped. The canyon floor was relatively flat, easy terrain compared to what they just navigated, but exhaustion was setting in. Sarah had been running on adrenaline for hours. Now, with the immediate threat past, she could feel her body shutting down. Frank was worse. He wasn't walking so much as controlled falling, catching himself on rock walls every few steps. Talk to me, Sarah said, trying to keep him alert. Keep your mind active. About what? Anything. Tell me about your first deployment. Saudi Arabia, first Gulf War. I was 19 years old and stupid enough to think I was invincible. He laughed, wincing. Got shot at on my second day in country. Rounds kicking up sand all around me. And you know what I did? What? I froze, just stood there like a deer in headlights. My sergeant tackled me into a ditch and called me 7 kinds of idiot. Frank smiled at the memory. Afterward, he told me that fear doesn't make you a coward. Freezing makes you dead. The trick is to turn fear into fuel. Is that what this is? Fuel? This is beyond fuel. This is running on fumes and spite. They walked in silence for a while. The canyon walls turned from black to gray to red as dawn approached. Behind them, Sarah heard a sound that made her stomach drop. Helicopter rotors. She pulled Frank into an overhang as the bird flew overhead, searching. It passed without spotting them, but it would be back. 2 clicks from the road now, maybe 40 minutes at their current pace. That's when they heard the engines. Vehicles, multiple, coming fast. Sarah pulled Frank against the canyon wall and listened. The sound was coming from ahead, from the direction of the road. Not behind them, which meant it wasn't the contractors, at least not the ones they'd been fighting. Could be friendly, Frank said, or could be more contractors coming to cut us off. The vehicles were closer now. Sarah could hear voices, radio chatter, American accents. Then she heard a sound that made her want to cry, the distinctive growl of a military Humvee engine, followed by the crackle of an official radio net. Sweep the canyon, over. Roger that, Alpha 6, sweeping now. U.S. Army, a regular patrol. Sarah pulled the flare gun from her pack, the one she'd been saving for exactly this moment. She stepped out into the open, aimed it skyward, and fired. The flare shot up in a brilliant arc of red light, clearly visible against the dawn sky. The vehicle engine stopped. Then, flare spotted, 200 meters north. All units converge. 2 Humvees roared into view, followed by a supply truck. Soldiers jumped out, weapons raised, training them on Sarah and Frank. U.S. Army personnel, Sarah shouted, raising her hands. Captain Sarah Vance, forward deployed. We need immediate assistance. A lieutenant approached, rifle still aimed at them. Captain, we're going to need you to identify yourself properly. Sarah recited her service number, unit designation, and commanding officer. Behind her, Frank did the same. The lieutenant lowered his weapon. Stand down. They're friendly. He moved closer, taking in their condition. The blood, the dirt, Frank's obviously broken leg. Jesus, ma'am, what happened to you? Long story, Lieutenant, but we need to get to base immediately, and we need you to contact the Inspector General's office. Not our chain of command, not through normal channels, directly to the IG. Ma'am, I don't have authorization to... Sarah pulled out the SD card. This contains evidence of crimes committed by a senior officer. If we go through regular channels, that officer will be notified, and the evidence will disappear. So I'm giving you a direct order, Lieutenant. Get me a secure line to the IG, now. The lieutenant looked at Frank, who nodded. Do what she says, son. Trust me on this. Yes, sir. He turned to his radio operator. Raise headquarters. Tell them we need a priority line to the Inspector General. Code word Delta 71. He looked back at Sarah. That's the code for suspected corruption in command. It'll get attention. Good. Sarah finally let herself relax. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd actually made it. Medics approached and started working on Frank. He waved them off initially, insisting Sarah get treated first, but she overruled him. Within minutes, he had an IV running and proper splints on his leg. Sarah watched the sun rise over the canyon walls, painting everything gold and red. Beautiful. She'd never been so happy to see a sunrise. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. Not the civilian bird that had been hunting them, but a proper UH-60 Blackhawk with U.S. Army markings. The pilot's orders were simple. Fly Sarah and Frank directly to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where Inspector General investigators were already waiting. They loaded Frank onto a stretcher. He grabbed Sarah's hand as they lifted him into the bird. We made it, he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and emotion. We made it, Sarah confirmed, but as the helicopter lifted off, she saw something that sent ice through her veins. In the distance, back toward the observation post, a column of black smoke rose into the morning sky. And on the horizon, she could see dust trails, multiple vehicles racing away from the site, scattering in different directions. They're destroying evidence, she said. The crew chief followed her gaze. What evidence? There was a convoy, trucks full of stolen antiquities. It was staged at... She tried to remember the coordinates from Frank's story. Frank, where were the trucks? But Frank had passed out, finally surrendering to exhaustion and pain. Sarah pulled out the SD card and stared at it. Everything depended on what was on this tiny piece of plastic. Photos, documentation, proof. If it wasn't enough... Ma'am? The crew chief was looking at her with concern. You okay? Fine, she pocketed the card. Just tired. The helicopter banked west, leaving the Devil's Anvil behind. Sarah watched it recede, that maze of red canyons that had nearly become their tomb. From this height, she could see the full scope of it. 60 square kilometers of brutal terrain, every canyon looking identical to the next. Frank had survived in there for 4 months. Alone, injured, hunted. The man was tougher than titanium. Ramstein Air Base, Germany, 6 hours later. Sarah sat in a secure briefing room, a cup of coffee going cold in front of her. Across the table, 3 investigators from the Inspector General's office studied Frank's SD card on a laptop. Colonel Patricia Hayes, lead investigator, had been scrolling through the files for the last 30 minutes. Her expression had gone from skeptical to neutral to deeply troubled. Captain Vance, she finally said, can you walk me through what we're looking at here? Sarah had already given her statement twice, but she did it again. The patrol, the convoy, Frank's discovery, the attempted murder disguised as desertion, the contractors, everything. When she finished, Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned the laptop around so Sarah could see the screen. It showed a photo of 3 semi-trucks at an abandoned compound. The containers were open, revealing ancient statues and pottery. In the foreground, clearly visible, was Colonel Harwick himself, shaking hands with a man Sarah didn't recognize. These photos are time-stamped and geotagged, Hayes said. Impossible to fake that level of metadata. And the documentation here, she gestured at the laptop. Master Sergeant Miller kept meticulous records, bill of lading, shipping manifests, communication intercepts. He wasn't just building a case, he was building an airtight prosecution. So, you believe us, Sarah said. I believe the evidence, which is even better. Hayes closed the laptop. But I need you to understand something, Captain. The investigation that's about to start will be extensive. We're talking about a senior officer, private military contractors, and what appears to be a smuggling operation worth tens of millions of dollars. This goes beyond Harwick. There are others involved, and they're going to fight back hard. I understand. Do you? Because the moment word gets out about this, you're going to have a target on your back. People who profit from this kind of corruption don't just walk away quietly. They protect their interests. Sarah thought about the contractors still out there, about Harwick, who probably already knew his operation had been compromised, about how much money was at stake. What do you recommend? She asked. For now, you and Master Sergeant Miller stay on this base. Protective custody, essentially. We'll handle the investigation, make the arrests. Once the key players are in custody, you'll be safe. How long? Could be days, could be weeks. Hayes stood. But Captain, I want you to know, what you and Miller did was extraordinary. You brought down a major corruption ring and survived an impossible situation. That takes courage I rarely see. Sarah didn't feel courageous. She felt exhausted, dirty, and desperately worried about Frank, who was still in surgery having his leg properly set. Can I see Miller once he's out of surgery? Of course. I'll have someone escort you to medical. Hayes paused at the door. Get some rest, Captain. You've earned it. But Sarah couldn't rest. Not yet. Because something was nagging at her. A detail that didn't quite fit. The contractors had been too organized, too well equipped, and they'd responded too fast to Frank's discovery 4 months ago. Like they'd been on standby, ready to clean up problems at a moment's notice. Which meant they'd done this before. How many other soldiers had found out about the smuggling? And how many of them had simply disappeared? The military hospital wing was quiet, sterile, nothing like the brutal chaos of the desert. Sarah sat in a chair outside the operating room, waiting. A nurse had brought her clean clothes and shown her to a shower, but even after scrubbing away the dirt and blood, she still felt filthy. The surgeon emerged at 1900 hours. Captain Vance? Sarah stood. How is he? Stable. The leg was worse than we thought. Compound fracture, some infection setting in. But we've got him on antibiotics and we set the bone properly. He'll need months of physical therapy, but he should make a full recovery. Can I see him? He's sleeping now. The anesthesia will take a few hours to wear off. You can sit with him if you'd like. Sarah followed the surgeon to a private room. Frank lay in a hospital bed, his leg elevated and encased in a proper cast. In the harsh, fluorescent light, she could see just how much the desert had taken from him. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His face was deeply lined, aged a decade. She pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, she let herself feel the full weight of it. They'd almost died, multiple times. Frank had spent 4 months slowly starving in a desert hellhole because he tried to do the right thing. And even now, with the evidence secure and investigation started, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. You look like hell, Valkyrie. Sarah's head snapped up. Frank's eyes were open, slightly unfocused, but aware. You're supposed to be asleep, she said. Surgery's over. Why would I sleep? He tried to sit up, winced, gave up. Did the IG people buy it? The evidence? They bought it. Hayes said you built an airtight case. Good, that's good. He closed his eyes for a moment. How long was I under? 6 hours. They had to rebuild your tibia from scratch. Explains why it feels like someone set my leg on fire and then stomped on it. He looked at her seriously. You should go rest. You look worse than I do. Impossible. Sarah, when's the last time you slept? She tried to remember. 48 hours ago? More? Time had become elastic during their run through the desert. I'm fine, she said. That's an order, Captain. Go find a bunk. Get some rack time. I'll still be here when you wake up. Frank, please. His voice was gentle now. You got me out alive. That's more than I deserved. Now let me return the favor and tell you to take care of yourself. Sarah wanted to argue, but exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on her. Her eyes kept trying to close on their own. Okay, she finally said, but if anything happens, they'll wake you up. Now go. She stood, squeezed his hand once, and left. The nurse directed her to temporary quarters, a small room with a cot, but it was clean and safe and blessedly quiet. Sarah collapsed onto the cot without bothering to undress. She was asleep in seconds and dreamed of red canyons and helicopter searchlights and the endless killing heat of the sun. She woke to pounding on the door. Sarah rolled off the cot, disoriented, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. The room was dark. She'd been asleep for, she checked her watch, 14 hours. The pounding came again. Captain Vance, open up. She recognized the voice. Major Simmons, one of Colonel Hayes's investigators. Sarah opened the door. Simmons looked grim. We have a situation. You need to come with me. Now. What kind of situation? The kind where we just learned that Harwick didn't run the smuggling operation. He was middle management. Simmons was already walking, forcing Sarah to jog to keep up. The real power behind it was a brigadier general named Matthias, and he just issued an order for your arrest. Sarah stopped walking. On what charges? Theft of military equipment, dereliction of duty, conspiracy with a known deserter. Simmons kept moving. It's all bullshit, of course, but Matthias has enough pull to make the charges stick long enough to get you into a cell where accidents can happen. And Miller? Already moved. We evacuated him to a secure location as soon as we learned about Matthias. They reached an elevator. Simmons punched a button for the sub-basement. Colonel Hayes wants you in protective custody until we can get enough evidence to arrest Matthias. But that could take days, and he's already moving to shut down the investigation. He can do that? He's a one-star general with 30 years of connections. He can do a lot of things, including make people disappear. The elevator doors opened onto a dimly lit hallway that smelled of concrete and stale air. Simmons led Sarah through a maze of corridors to a secure room with a heavy steel door. Colonel Hayes was inside, along with 2 other investigators and a laptop displaying what looked like organizational charts. Captain, Hayes said, we need to move fast. General Matthias has activated military police to bring you in. We have maybe 30 minutes before they arrive with the proper paperwork to supersede our authority. So what's the plan? We get you off this base and somewhere he can't reach you. Civilian custody, probably. I've got contacts at the German Federal Police who owe me favors. Hayes pulled up a new document on the laptop. But first, I need you to look at this and tell me if you recognize any of these people. The screen showed photos of various military personnel and civilians. Sarah scanned them quickly. Most were unfamiliar. Then she saw one that made her freeze. Him. She pointed to a photo of a man in contractor gear. He was the team leader for Black Shields. I saw him through my scope at the observation post. That's Marcus Cade, former Delta Force, now runs private security. Hayes pulled up more information. He's been on Matthias's payroll for 5 years, and according to financial records we just uncovered, he's been paid over $2 million for consulting services. Consulting, Sarah said flatly, cleaning up problems, like soldiers who discover too much about smuggling operations. Hayes closed the laptop. We have enough to start building a case against Matthias, but we need time. Time for forensic accountants to trace the money. Time for investigators to interview witnesses. And we can't do that if you're sitting in a cell, or worse. What about Frank? Miller is safe. We have him at a location even I don't know. Better that way, less chance of leaks. You'll be reunited once this is resolved. Sarah didn't like it, but she didn't see another option. Where are you taking me? First to a safe house in Frankfurt. Then, depending on how fast Matthias moves, how many exits from this level? 2. Both are probably already compromised. Then we don't run, we defend. Sarah looked around the room. No weapons, no body armor, just furniture and computer equipment. Captain, we're investigators, not combat troops, one of the other staff said, fear clear in his voice. Then today you learn. Sarah started grabbing chairs and desks, building a hasty barricade at the door. Simmons, you said you did a tour in Iraq. You remember urban combat? Yeah, but no buts. We have maybe 2 minutes before they breach this room. Help me build a funnel. She turned to Hayes. Colonel, you need to destroy that laptop. Everything on it. They can't get that data. Hayes didn't hesitate. She pulled out her sidearm and put 3 rounds through the laptop. Sparks flew. The screen went dark. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving fast. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside the door. Simmons took position on the other side. The rest of the investigators huddled behind the barricade. The footsteps stopped outside. Then the door exploded inward. The flashbang came first, bouncing into the room with that distinctive metallic clink. Sarah closed her eyes and opened her mouth. Basic training reflex. The bang was still deafening, the flash still brilliant even through closed eyelids, but she'd minimized the effects. The contractors poured through the doorway in a professional stack. 4 men, full tactical gear, weapons up. Sarah hit the first one with a desk chair, swinging it like a baseball bat. The man's rifle discharged into the ceiling as he went down. She grabbed his weapon, brought it up, fired twice into the second contractor's chest. Body armor absorbed the rounds, but the impact knocked him backward into the man behind him. Simmons tackled the third contractor, grappling for his weapon. They went down in a tangle. The fourth contractor cleared the door, weapon tracking towards Sarah. She dove behind the barricade as he fired. Rounds punched through furniture and concrete. Hayes returned fire with her sidearm, 3 controlled shots. One caught the contractor in the exposed part of his throat, above his body armor. He dropped. Sarah rolled to her feet, the stolen rifle up. 2 contractors left standing. One was trading shots with Hayes. The other was still grappling with Simmons. She shot the one fighting Simmons, a careful shot to the leg that dropped him without killing him. They'd need at least one alive for questioning. The last contractor saw the situation deteriorating and tried to retreat. Sarah put 2 rounds into the doorframe next to his head. He froze. "Drop it," she shouted. "Weapon down, now!" He complied, letting his rifle clatter to the floor. Sarah moved forward, kicked it away, zip-tied his hands with a cable she ripped from the destroyed laptop. Simmons was bleeding from a cut above his eye, but otherwise intact. Hayes was checking the contractors Sarah had shot, feeling for pulses. 2 dead, she reported. 2 wounded. Sarah grabbed the contractor she'd zip-tied and slammed him against the wall. "How many more of you are there?" He smiled, blood on his teeth. "Enough. You think this matters? General Matthias has friends everywhere. You're just delaying the inevitable." "We'll see about that." Sarah turned to Hayes. "We need to move. Now, before reinforcements arrive. The exits are compromised. Then we make a new exit." Sarah looked at the ceiling. They were in a sub-basement, which meant there were at least 3 floors above them. "How good is base security at responding to emergencies?" "Slow. They're trained for external threats, not internal breaches." "Good, because we're about to create a lot of chaos." Sarah grabbed one of the dead contractor's radios and switched it to the base-wide emergency frequency. Then she pulled the fire alarm on the wall. Immediately, sirens began wailing throughout the facility. Automated announcements ordered evacuation. And within seconds, Sarah could hear confused voices on the radio. Base security trying to figure out what was happening. In the confusion, we blend in with the evacuating personnel, Sarah explained. Steal a vehicle. Get off this base before Matthias realizes we slipped through. Hayes looked skeptical. That's a terrible plan. You have a better one? No. Then let's move. They stripped tactical vests and weapons from the contractors. Better to look like security personnel than investigators. Sarah took point, Simmons covered their rear, and Hayes stayed in the middle with the other two investigators. They moved through the maze of corridors, following the flow of evacuating base personnel. Twice, they passed military police heading the opposite direction, toward the secure wing. Nobody questioned them. In the chaos, everyone assumed everyone else knew what they were doing. They emerged into the cool German night. The base was in organized pandemonium. Fire trucks, security patrols, confused soldiers milling around in various states of undress. Sarah spotted a motor pool 50 meters away. There, we take a vehicle and go. They made it to the motor pool without challenge. Sarah hotwired a Humvee, a skill Frank had taught her during one memorable training exercise, and climbed into the driver's seat. Everyone in. We've got maybe 30 seconds before someone realizes we're stealing this. They piled in. Sarah gunned the engine and rolled toward the base exit. The gate guards, distracted by the chaos and the fire alarm, waved them through without checking IDs. And just like that, they were off base. Sarah drove for 10 minutes in silence, taking random turns, doubling back twice to check for tails. Finally, satisfied they weren't being followed, she pulled into an alley behind a closed restaurant and killed the engine. Okay, she said, now what? Hayes pulled out a phone and made a call. Spoke in rapid German for 2 minutes. Hung up. My contact with the federal police is coming to meet us. He'll get us to a safe location and start coordinating protection with the German government. She looked at Sarah. You just assaulted U.S. military personnel on a U.S. military base. Even though they were contractors working illegally, this is going to be complicated. Complicated is fine, Sarah said. Dead is not. Simmons laughed, slightly hysterical. Did we really just do that? Break out of Ramstein using a fire alarm and a stolen Humvee? We did, Hayes confirmed, and we're going to have some very uncomfortable conversations with very angry generals tomorrow. But we're alive. That's what matters. Sarah leaned back against the seat, adrenaline finally wearing off. They were alive. For now. But Matthias was still out there. Harwick was still free. And the contractors who'd hunted them through the desert hadn't all been accounted for. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The German federal police officer who arrived was a weathered man in his 50s named Klaus Richter. He took one look at their stolen Humvee and commandeered tactical gear and didn't ask a single question. You are Colonel Hayes? He asked in accented English. I am. You're Klaus? Ja, please, come with me. We go somewhere safe. He gestured to an unmarked sedan. Your vehicle, it stays here. My people will handle it. They transferred to Klaus's car. He drove with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before, taking them through Frankfurt streets at a pace that was fast, but not attention-grabbing. You have files? He asked. Evidence of this corruption? We did, Hayes said. But we had to destroy the laptop to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. The originals are with the Inspector General's office. Good. This General Matthias, he cannot touch those? He's trying, but the IG has protocols. It'll take him time to suppress the investigation. Time, Klaus nodded. Time is what we give you. The American military has no jurisdiction on German soil. If you stay with us, they cannot simply take you. What about extradition? Sarah asked. That takes weeks, months if we slow-walk the paperwork. By then, your investigation will be complete, yes? That's the hope. Klaus pulled into an underground garage beneath a nondescript office building. They took an elevator to the 4th floor, where he led them to what looked like a corporate apartment, furnished but impersonal. "You stay here," he said. "We have security watching the building. Nobody comes in or out without us knowing." He handed Hayes a phone. "This is secure. You can contact your people with it." "Thank you, Klaus. I won't forget this. Your government has helped mine many times. We return the favor." He nodded to Sarah. "Captain, you should rest. You look like you have not slept in days." "I slept 14 hours last night." "And before that?" Sarah couldn't remember. "A while." "Then sleep more. Your body needs it." He left, locking the door behind him. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with windows overlooking Frankfurt's skyline. Hayes immediately got on the phone, coordinating with her team back at Ramstein. Simmons started checking the windows, professional paranoia on display. Sarah collapsed onto a couch and closed her eyes. Just for a moment. She woke 6 hours later to the smell of coffee. Hayes was at the kitchen table, laptop open, a new one, supplied by Klaus. "Anything new?" Sarah asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Matthias made his move. He's claiming the entire investigation is unauthorized, that we fabricated evidence, and that you and Miller are actually conspirators in the smuggling operation." Hayes looked up from the screen. "It's bold. Stupid, but bold. Will it work? Not long term. The evidence is too solid. But short term? He's buying himself time to destroy records and intimidate witnesses. Classic corruption playbook." Sarah poured herself coffee and sat down. "What about Frank? Is he safe?" "Last report came in 2 hours ago. He's secure and recovering well." Hayes turned the laptop so Sarah could see the screen. It showed a secure chat window. "We've been in contact. He's worried about you." "Tell him I'm fine," Hayes typed. A moment later, a response appeared. "Fine is what soldiers say right before they collapse. Tell her to actually rest. Miller." Sarah smiled despite everything. "He's not wrong. Neither am I. You need more than coffee and 6 hours of sleep. When's the last time you ate?" Sarah tried to remember. "MRE, 48 hours ago?" Hayes stood and opened the refrigerator. Klaus had stocked it with basics. She pulled out bread, cheese, meat. "Eat, that's an order." While Sarah ate, Hayes continued working. Phone calls, emails, coordinating the investigation from exile. Sarah could see the stress building in her shoulders, the way she rubbed her temples. "Colonel," Sarah said, "you should rest too." "Can't. Matthias is moving fast. If we don't counter his narrative immediately, he'll poison the well." She pulled up a new document. "I'm preparing a statement for release to the media. Everything we know about the smuggling operation, Matthias's involvement, the attacks on you and Miller. We go public. Force this into the open where he can't suppress it. That'll end your career." Hayes looked at her steadily. "So be it. I joined the army to serve my country, not to protect corrupt generals. If doing the right thing cost me my rank, then I never deserved it in the first place." Sarah thought about Frank, who'd made the same choice 4 months ago, who'd sacrificed everything to expose the truth. The man had lost 4 months of his life, nearly died multiple times, and would carry the scars forever. But he'd never wavered, never compromised. He'd stayed true to his principles, even when it would have been easier, safer, to look the other way. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "For now, stay alive, rest, recover." Hayes went back to typing. "But when this goes public, I'll need you to give an interview. Tell your story to the media. Put a face on what Matthias did. Are you willing?" Sarah thought about the contractors who'd hunted them, about the observation post siege, about Frank's broken leg and 4 months of suffering. "I'm willing." "Good, because we're going to war, Captain. Not with bullets, but with evidence and testimony and the full weight of military justice. And when it's over, Matthias and everyone involved will pay for what they did." The story broke 3 days later. Hayes released her statement to three major news outlets simultaneously: the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Military Times. Within hours, it was everywhere. Brigadier General accused of antiquity smuggling. U.S. soldiers hunted by contractors in corruption cover-up. Inspector General investigates desert survival ordeal. Sarah watched the coverage from the Frankfurt safe house. The reporters had done their homework, connecting dots between Matthias, Harwick, the contractors, and years of suspicious shipments. Frank's photos appeared on screen: the trucks, the artifacts, Harwick shaking hands with smugglers. The Pentagon responded with the standard, "We take these allegations seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation" statement. But the public pressure was enormous. Congress announced hearings. The Inspector General expanded the investigation. And most importantly, military police arrested General Matthias at his home in Virginia. Sarah's phone, the secure one Klaus had provided, rang. It was Hayes. "We won," the colonel said simply. "Matthias is in custody. Harwick was arrested an hour ago, and the contractors are being rounded up. It's over." Sarah felt the tension she'd been carrying for days finally release. What about Frank? He'll be flying back to the States tomorrow. Full military honors, restoration of rank, back pay for the 4 months they stole from him. And the Army is fast-tracking his medical care. Best surgeons, unlimited physical therapy, whatever he needs. And me? You're clear. No charges. In fact, there's talk of a commendation. You saved a soldier's life and exposed massive corruption. The brass wants to make you a hero. I don't want to be a hero. I just want to go home. Understood. There's a flight leaving Frankfurt tomorrow morning. Klaus will take you to the airport. You'll be back at Fort Bragg by tomorrow night. After the call ended, Sarah sat quietly for a long time. It was over. Really, truly over. Matthias arrested. Harwick in custody. The smuggling operation shut down. Frank safe and recovering. They'd won. But the cost had been enormous. Frank would carry those scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of his life. Sarah had killed 2 people in the facility breach, something that would sit heavy on her conscience despite the justification. And dozens of soldiers had been caught up in this corruption, their careers damaged, their trust in leadership broken. The system had worked, eventually, but it had almost failed. If Frank hadn't been as tough as he was, if Sarah hadn't found him, if they hadn't made it out of the desert, Matthias and Harwick would still be smuggling antiquities, and none of this would have come to light. How many other corruption rings were out there, still operating, waiting for someone brave or stupid enough to expose them? Sarah didn't have answers, but she knew one thing. She'd never look at the chain of command the same way again. Trust had to be earned, not assumed, and sometimes doing the right thing meant disobeying orders. Frank had taught her that, and she'd never forget it. The flight home was uneventful. Sarah slept most of the way, 14 hours of dreamless rest that her body desperately needed. When she landed at Fort Bragg, a major from her unit was waiting. "Captain Vance, welcome home," he saluted. "The commander wants to see you tomorrow morning. For now, you're on leave. Rest, recover, and we'll debrief when you're ready." "Thank you, sir. Do you know where Master Sergeant Miller is?" "Walter Reed Medical Center. He arrived this morning. I'm told he's doing well." Sarah caught the first flight to D.C. She arrived at Walter Reed that evening and navigated the maze of corridors to Frank's room. He was sitting up in bed, watching the news coverage of Matthias's arrest. His leg was still in a cast, but he looked better. Color back in his face, some weight regained from decent hospital food. "Valkyrie," he said when she entered. "About damn time. I was busy saving the world." "I heard." He muted the TV. "They're calling you a hero, saying you single-handedly took down a corrupt general." "That's not how it happened." "I know. I was there." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me what really happened after they separated us." Sarah sat and told him everything. The breach at Ramstein, The escape, the safe house in Frankfurt, the media blitz. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. Hayes is good people, he said when she finished. She put her career on the line. She said the same about you. And me. Frank smiled. Guess we're all crazy then. He shifted in bed, wincing. Doctors say I'll walk again. No permanent limp, assuming I do the physical therapy. And the Army's giving me full retirement with benefits. After 30 years of service, I get to actually enjoy it instead of dying in a desert. What will you do? I don't know. Sleep in, read books, maybe teach. There's a community college near my sister's place that needs instructors for their criminal justice program. He looked at her seriously. What about you? You staying in? Sarah had been thinking about that question for days. I don't know. Part of me wants to. The Army's been my life since OCS. But another part of me, she trailed off. Another part of you can't stop thinking about how the system almost failed, Frank finished. How close we came to being disappeared and forgotten. How many others might have been. Yeah, that's healthy. The day you stop questioning authority is the day you become part of the problem. He reached over and squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide, Valkyrie, know this. You're one of the best officers I've ever served with. You have integrity, courage, and you don't abandon your people. Those qualities are rare. Don't let what happened in the Anvil take that from you. Sarah felt her eyes burning. I thought we were going to die out there, multiple times. So did I, but we didn't. We survived, and we made sure the truth came out. That matters. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside the window, DC went about its business, oblivious to the drama that had played out in the Syrian desert. Frank, Sarah finally said, when you were out there alone, hiding in the Anvil for 4 months, what kept you going? He thought about it for a moment. Honestly, stubbornness. I wasn't going to let Harwick and Matthias win. I wasn't going to let them write the story of how Frank Miller ran away like a coward. And I knew that if I could just survive long enough, someone would come looking. Someone who knew me well enough to know I didn't run. And I did. You did, he smiled. Told you that you had potential. Just needed to learn that the map is a suggestion, not a cage. Sarah laughed despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Best, worst advice I ever got. It's kept you alive so far. They talked for another hour before Sarah finally stood to leave. Frank caught her hand. Sarah, Valkyrie, thank you for everything. You're welcome, but Frank, you need to stop thanking me. You'd have done the same for me. In a heartbeat, she squeezed his hand once more and left, knowing he was right. They'd saved each other. That's what soldiers did. 1 month later, the congressional hearing room was packed. Sarah sat at a long table, dressed in her Class A uniform, medals gleaming under the harsh lights. Beside her sat Frank, also in uniform, his cane leaning against his chair. Across from them, a panel of senators prepared to ask questions. Behind them, dozens of reporters crowded the gallery. This wasn't just about Matthias and Harwick anymore. It had become a referendum on military corruption and accountability. Senator Patricia Morgan, chair of the Armed Services Committee, called the hearing to order. Captain Vance, Master Sergeant Miller, thank you for being here today. The American people deserve to hear your story directly. She looked down at her notes. Captain, let's start with you. Can you walk us through the events that led to you entering a restricted zone in Syria? Sarah took a breath and began. She told them about the file marked AWOL, about Frank's reputation and her certainty that something was wrong, about the cairns and the mazes and finding Frank half dead in a crevice. She told them about the contractors, the observation post, the helicopter hunt through the canyon, the 100-meter cliff descent in the dark. She told them about Matthias's attempt to arrest her at Ramstein, about the breach and the escape and Klaus's help in Frankfurt. She told them everything. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Senator Morgan said, That is one of the most extraordinary accounts of courage and dedication to duty I've ever heard. Master Sergeant Miller, would you like to add anything? Frank leaned forward. Just this, Senator. Captain Vance saved my life at great risk to her own. She didn't have to come looking for me. She could have accepted the official story and moved on with her career. But she didn't, because she has something that's become rare in modern military leadership: integrity. He paused, his voice growing stronger. General Matthias and Colonel Harwick stole from the people of Syria. They enriched themselves on the suffering of others. And when they were discovered, they tried to murder a soldier to cover their crimes. That's not the army I served in for 30 years. That's not the military that America deserves. And I'm grateful that people like Captain Vance and Colonel Hayes exist to hold the line when the system fails. The senators asked more questions about procedures, about oversight, about how to prevent this from happening again. Frank and Sarah answered as best they could. Finally, after 3 hours, Senator Morgan gavelled the hearing to a close. This committee will be making recommendations for comprehensive reform of military oversight procedures. Thank you both for your service and for your courage in coming forward. Outside the hearing room, reporters swarmed them. Sarah gave a brief statement thanking the Inspector General's office and the German Federal Police. Frank declined to comment, citing ongoing medical treatment. They escaped to a waiting car and rode back to Walter Reed in silence. That wasn't so bad, Frank finally said. Speak for yourself. I hate public speaking. You did great, very officer-like, all professional and composed. I was terrified, I know. But they couldn't tell. That's what matters. He looked out the window at D.C. passing by. You know what the best part of all this is? What? We won. Against impossible odds, against corrupt generals and private armies, and the full weight of the system trying to bury us, we won. Truth came out. Justice was served. Bad guys are in prison. He smiled. That's rare, Valkyrie. Enjoy it. Sarah thought about that. He was right. In a world where corruption often won, where whistleblowers were destroyed and truth was buried, they'd actually succeeded. They'd exposed the conspiracy, survived the aftermath, and forced accountability. It wasn't perfect. Matthias would likely cut a deal, serve reduced time. Some of the contractors had escaped. The antiquities were mostly gone, sold into private collections around the world. And the soldiers who'd been caught up in this, whose careers had been damaged, whose trust had been broken, would carry those scars forever. But it was something. It was progress. It was proof that the system, however flawed, could still work when good people refused to give up. Yeah, Sarah said quietly, we won. And for the first time since finding that dog tag in the desert, she allowed herself to believe it. 3 months after the congressional hearing, Sarah stood at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching waves crash against rocks 100 feet below. Fort Bragg was 2,000 miles behind her. The Army had granted her extended leave after the hearing. Decompression time, they called it. Time to process everything that had happened. She'd chosen California for no particular reason, except that it was as far from the desert as she could get. Ocean instead of sand. Cool fog instead of killing heat. The sound of waves instead of helicopter rotors. Her phone buzzed. A text from Frank. Physical therapy kicked my ass today. Doc says I'm ahead of schedule. How's California? She typed back. Wet, cold, perfect. That's my girl. Still thinking about what's next? Every day. Take your time. The answer will come. Sarah pocketed her phone and kept walking. The coastal trail wound through cypress trees twisted by constant wind, their branches reaching inland like they were trying to escape the ocean. She understood the feeling. The last 3 months had been a whirlwind. The media attention had been overwhelming. Interviews, documentaries, book deals she'd turned down. Everyone wanted a piece of the desert hero story. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a soldier who'd done her job and gotten lucky. Frank had handled it better, deflecting attention with self-deprecating humor and praise for everyone else involved. He'd become something of a folk hero to enlisted soldiers, proof that NCOs could stand up to corrupt officers and survive. But at night, Sarah still dreamed of the desert, the heat, the helicopter searchlights, the contractors closing in. She'd wake up reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, her heart pounding, certain she was back in the devil's anvil, fighting for her life. The Army had offered counseling. She'd gone to 3 sessions before realizing the counselor had never been in combat and couldn't understand what she was processing. So she'd stopped going and tried to work through it herself. Walking helped. The rhythm of footsteps, the sound of the ocean, the cool air, all of it helped quiet the noise in her head. She reached a bench overlooking a cove where seals hauled out on rocks. She sat down and pulled out her tablet. 3 emails waited for her, all with subject lines that represented different futures. The first was from the Army. Captain Vance, career development opportunity. They wanted her to attend Command and General Staff College, fast-tracking her toward Major and beyond. The message was clear. The Army valued her and wanted to invest in her future. The second was from a private security firm. Exceptional leadership experience sought. 6 figures, overseas contracts, using her skills in the private sector. She deleted similar emails dozens of times, but this one came with a personal note from the CEO praising her integrity in impossible circumstances. The third was from a veterans advocacy organization. Help us fight for those who serve. They wanted her to join their team investigating military corruption and supporting whistleblowers. Lower pay than either other option, but a chance to make sure what happened to Frank didn't happen to others. 3 paths, 3 futures, all of them valid. But which one was right? Her phone rang. Not Frank this time, Colonel Hayes. "Captain," Hayes said when Sarah answered, "how's the leave treating you?" "Good, quiet, lots of time to think." "That's what I was hoping. Sarah, I'm calling because I wanted to give you a heads up on something before you hear it through official channels." Sarah tensed. "What is it?" "Matthias took a plea deal, 20 years at Leavenworth, full reduction in rank, forfeiture of all benefits. Harwick got 15. And the contractors who assaulted Ramstein are facing various charges from assault to conspiracy." That's good news, right? It is, but there's more. The investigation expanded beyond just Matthias and Harwick. We found evidence of similar smuggling operations in 3 other theaters. Multiple officers involved, spanning back nearly a decade. It's bigger than we thought. Sarah closed her eyes. How much bigger? Millions in stolen antiquities, dozens of military personnel compromised, and potentially other soldiers who tried to expose it and were silenced. Hayes paused. "We're trying to identify cases where desertion or AWOL charges might have been fabricated to cover up whistleblowing. It's going to take years to unravel." "Years," Sarah repeated. "Which brings me to why I'm calling. The Inspector General's office is forming a new task force specifically to investigate military corruption. We need officers with integrity, combat experience, and the courage to take on powerful people. I recommended you for a position on the team." "Colonel, I'm still figuring out if I want to stay in the Army." "I know, and I'm not pressuring you, but I wanted you to know the option exists. If you decide to stay in, there's meaningful work to be done. Work that honors what you and Frank went through." After they hung up, Sarah sat staring at the ocean. 4 options now: career officer, private sector, advocacy work, corruption investigator. She thought about Frank, lying in a crevice for weeks with a broken leg, surviving on contaminated water and sheer willpower because he believed the truth mattered. She thought about the other soldiers Hayes had mentioned, the ones who might have been silenced before anyone came looking. She thought about why she'd joined the Army in the first place. Not for career advancement or money, because she'd wanted to serve something bigger than herself. to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to stand for something that mattered. The answer came then, clear and certain. She pulled out her phone and typed an email. Fort Bragg, 2 weeks later. Sarah walked into Colonel Hayes's office in her Class A uniform, the one she'd worn to the congressional hearing. Hayes looked up from her paperwork and smiled. Captain Vance, welcome back. I take it you made a decision? I did. Sarah remained standing at attention. I'm requesting transfer to the Inspector General's Corruption Task Force, if the position is still available. Hayes stood and offered her hand. It is, and I'm glad. We need people like you. They shook. Sarah sat down and Hayes pulled out a folder thick with documents. Before we make this official, I need to be honest with you about what you're signing up for, Hayes said. This isn't normal Army work. You won't be commanding troops or planning operations. You'll be investigating fellow officers, collecting evidence, building cases, making enemies. I understand. Do you? Because the people we'll be going after have power, connections, and resources. They'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe worse. What happened with Matthias was just the beginning. Some of these corruption networks go back decades. Sarah thought about the contractors who'd hunted her through the desert, about Matthias trying to have her arrested, about Frank's 4 months of hell. I understand, she said again, and I'm still in. Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, your transfer goes through next week. You'll be based here at Bragg, but will travel extensively. First assignment is Afghanistan. There's a supply officer who's been flagged for suspicious procurement patterns. We think he's skimming funds, but we need proof. When do I leave? 2 months. That gives you time to complete the investigator's course at Fort Leonard Wood. 6 weeks of training on evidence collection, interview techniques, legal procedures. It's intensive. I can handle intensive. I know you can. Hayes opened the folder and pulled out several documents. This is your official assignment letter. Sign here, here, and here. Sarah signed. With each signature, she felt the path solidifying beneath her feet. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. One more thing, Hayes said. Master Sergeant Miller called me last week. He wanted to know if you'd made a decision. I told him I didn't know yet, but I hoped you'd choose this. What did he say? He said, and I quote, if Valkyrie's half as stubborn investigating corruption as she was dragging my ass through the desert, those corrupt bastards don't stand a chance. Hayes smiled. High praise from Frank Miller. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. I should go see him. It's been a few weeks. He'd like that. He's at his sister's place now, doing outpatient therapy. Apparently, he's driving the physical therapist crazy by pushing too hard, too fast. That sounds like Frank. Hayes handed her the folder. Welcome to the team, Captain. Your country is lucky to have you. Frank's sister lived in a small town in North Carolina, about an hour from Bragg. Sarah drove out on a Saturday morning, following GPS directions through increasingly rural roads until she reached a farmhouse surrounded by pine trees. Frank was on the front porch, working through exercises with resistance bands. His cane leaned against the railing nearby. He looked up when her car pulled into the driveway. Valkyrie! He set down the bands and stood, moving carefully but steadily. Damn, it's good to see you. Sarah got out and climbed the porch steps. Frank pulled her into a hug, a real one, the kind soldiers give when they've been through hell together. You're walking better, she said. Doc says I'm at 90%. Might get to 95 if I keep at it. He gestured to a pair of rocking chairs. Sit. Tell me what you've been up to. Sarah sat and told him about California, about the thinking time, about Hayes's offer and her decision to join the corruption task force. Frank listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, rocking slowly in his chair. That's good work, he finally said. Important work. But Sarah, you need to know what you're getting into. Going after corruption doesn't win you friends. It makes you a target. For the rest of your career, people will wonder if you're investigating them. Some will try to get to you first, dig up dirt, destroy your credibility before you can destroy theirs. I know. Do you? Because it's one thing to fight through a desert when you know who the enemy is. It's another thing entirely to fight within your own organization, where the enemy wears the same uniform and hides behind regulations. Sarah turned to look at him. Frank, why did you do it? Why did you expose the smuggling operation when you knew it would cost you everything? He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the pine trees. Because I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, to bear true faith and allegiance. And when I saw officers violating that oath, stealing and lying, and hurting the army I loved, I couldn't just walk away, even knowing what it would cost. And was it worth it? Frank looked at her then, his eyes clear and certain. Every damn day, even the 4 months in the desert, even the broken leg and the nightmares and the contractors hunting me, because the truth came out, justice was served, and maybe, just maybe, the next soldier who sees something wrong will be brave enough to speak up, because they saw that Frank Miller did it and survived. Sarah felt something settle in her chest. That's what she wanted too, to be the person who stood up when it mattered, who didn't look away when it was easier to ignore, who honored the oath she'd taken. Then yeah, she said, it'll be worth it. Frank smiled. That's my Valkyrie, stubborn to the end. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking in their chairs, watching birds flit between the trees. It was peaceful, quiet, nothing like the chaos they'd survived together. You staying for lunch? Frank asked. My sister makes the best fried chicken in 3 counties, claims it's a family recipe, but I'm pretty sure she stole it from a cookbook. I'd love that. Good. Because I want to hear more about this investigator's course, and you need to tell me if you've been sleeping better. Sarah hesitated. Some nights are better than others. Yeah, same here. Frank's expression grew serious. The dreams where you're back there and you can't get out, and the helicopter's coming, those don't just go away, but they get less frequent, and you learn to manage them. How? By remembering that we got out, we survived, we won, and every morning you wake up in a bed instead of a rock crevice is a gift. He stood, testing his weight on his bad leg. Come on, let's eat, and then I'll show you the garden my sister's making me help with. Apparently, physical therapy isn't just in a clinic. It's also 3 hours a day pulling weeds. Sarah followed him inside, smiling. Frank was going to be okay. They both were. It would take time, and there would be hard days, but they'd survive the devil's anvil. They could survive anything. Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, 6 weeks later. The investigator's course was exactly as intense as Hayes had promised. Sarah spent 12 hours a day learning evidence collection procedures, interview techniques, legal frameworks, and case building. The instructors were former military lawyers and criminal investigators who'd seen every trick corrupt officers could pull. Rule 1, the lead instructor said during the first week, trust the evidence, not the person. The highest-ranking general can lie just as easily as the lowest private. Your job isn't to make friends, it's to find the truth. Sarah took notes furiously, absorbing everything. The other students in her class were a mix of MPs, JAG officers, and criminal investigators. Most had years of experience. Sarah was the youngest and least experienced, but she had something they didn't. She'd lived through what they only studied in case files. During a break one afternoon, another student approached her, Captain Marcus Chen, an MP with a decade of service. You're the one from the Matthias case, he said. It wasn't a question. I am. That was good work. A lot of people were watching to see if the system would actually hold a general accountable. You proved it could. We proved it could, Sarah corrected. It took a lot of people doing the right thing. Chen nodded. Still, it matters. I've been doing this work for 10 years, and I've seen too many cases where corruption was covered up because investigating it was too politically dangerous. Matthias going down sent a message. What message? That rank doesn't make you untouchable. That if you're corrupt, someone will eventually come for you. He smiled. Even if that someone is a captain and a sergeant with nothing but guts and evidence. During the fourth week, Sarah's class ran through a practical exercise, a mock investigation of a supply officer suspected of theft. They had to collect evidence, interview witnesses, and build a case strong enough to survive legal scrutiny. Sarah's team found the evidence quickly: falsified requisition forms, suspicious bank deposits. But when they tried to interview the mock supply officer, he lawyered up and refused to cooperate. They hit a wall. The instructor stopped the exercise. Okay, what did you miss? Sarah reviewed her notes. The evidence was solid, the timeline was clear, but something was off. The junior enlisted, she said suddenly. We focused on the officer, but his clerk would have processed the paperwork. She saw everything. And she's scared. She knows if she talks, she's implicating her boss and potentially destroying her own career. Sarah stood and walked to the whiteboard, thinking it through. We need to offer her protection, immunity from prosecution if she cooperates. Show her that doing the right thing won't ruin her life. The instructor smiled. Exactly. Corruption rarely happens in isolation. There are always people around the edges who saw things, processed paperwork, carried out orders. Your job is to find those people and convince them that honesty is safer than loyalty to a corrupt officer. It was the lesson Frank had lived, that speaking up was dangerous, but staying silent was worse. That the system could protect whistleblowers if they were brave enough to come forward. Sarah graduated from the course with the highest marks in her class. Her instructors praised her analytical thinking and her ability to see beyond the surface of cases. But what they didn't know was that she had an advantage. She'd been on the other side. She knew what it felt like to be hunted by the system, and that empathy would make her a better investigator. Afghanistan. 4 months after joining the task force, Sarah stood in a supply depot at Forward Operating Base Shank, reviewing inventory logs on a laptop while a very nervous captain watched her work. I can explain the discrepancies, Captain Bradley said for the third time. The requisition system has bugs. Sometimes items get logged twice or... Captain Bradley, Sarah interrupted. I've been reviewing supply systems for 4 months now. I know what bugs look like. This isn't a bug. She turned the laptop so he could see the screen. These requisitions show you ordering 500 MRE cases, but the delivery receipts show only 300 arrived. That's a discrepancy of 200 cases. At 50 meals per case, that's 10,000 missing MREs. Like I said, system errors. The same pattern appears with medical supplies, ammunition, fuel, and vehicle parts. Always a gap between what you requisitioned and what was delivered. Always 20 to 40% missing. Sarah stood and faced him directly. Where's the missing material, Captain? Bradley's face had gone pale. I want a lawyer. That's your right, but before you do that, you should know that I've already interviewed your supply sergeant. He's been keeping his own records, what he calls insurance. He has photos, timestamps, everything, and he's willing to testify in exchange for immunity. It was a bluff. Sarah hadn't interviewed anyone yet, but she'd learned that bluffs worked when the target was already guilty and scared. Bradley's shoulders sagged. I didn't keep any of it. It all went to a contractor. Which contractor? Black River Solutions. They handle logistics for half the bases in this region. Their site manager approached me 2 years ago, said they could both make money if I was willing to be flexible with the numbers. He sat down heavily. I knew it was wrong, but I was buried in student loans, and they were offering $50,000. I thought I'd do it for 6 months, pay off the debt, and stop. But you didn't stop. They had evidence by then, photos of me meeting with their people, copies of the falsified requisitions. They said if I tried to quit, they'd expose me. So I kept doing it. Sarah had heard variations of this story before. Junior officers trapped by debts or bad decisions, then blackmailed into ongoing corruption. It was a pattern that Black River and companies like them exploited ruthlessly. Captain Bradley, you're going to be charged. There's no avoiding that. But if you cooperate, give us everything about Black River's operation, testify against them, help us shut this down, the prosecutor might be lenient. How lenient? I can't promise anything, but cooperation looks better than obstruction. Bradley nodded slowly. Okay, I'll tell you everything. 3 days later, Sarah had a case file thick enough to choke a horse. Bradley's testimony, corroborated by the supply sergeant's records, showed Black River had been systematically stealing supplies from multiple bases for at least 3 years. The total losses exceeded $2 million. Sarah presented her findings to the task force leadership via secure video call. "Excellent work, Captain," Hayes said from her office at Bragg. "This is exactly what we needed. I'll coordinate with JAG and the FBI. Black River operates in enough locations that federal prosecutors will want this case." "What about the soldiers who got caught up in this?" Sarah asked. "There are at least 5 more officers like Bradley, trapped by blackmail. Do we prosecute them all?" "That's above my pay grade, but I'll recommend leniency for the ones who cooperate. The real targets are the corporations exploiting them." Hayes paused. "How are you holding up out there?" "Fine. The work is," Sarah searched for the right word, "clarifying. Every case I solve feels like I'm honoring what Frank went through. He'd be proud of you. I spoke with him last week. He's walking without a cane now." "That's great. He also said to tell you that if you find anyone smuggling antiquities, you should call him immediately. Apparently, he's considering a second career as a consultant." Sarah laughed. "That sounds exactly like something he'd say." After the call ended, Sarah sat in her office, really just a converted storage room at FOB Shank, and reviewed her notes. The Black River case would take months to fully prosecute, but the framework was solid. She'd done good work. Her phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "Heard you bagged a big fish in Afghanistan. Nicely done." She replied, "Just following the evidence, like someone taught me. That someone is extremely wise and handsome, and modest, always." Sarah smiled and set down her phone. Outside her door, the base was alive with activity. Soldiers going about their duties, maintaining equipment, preparing for missions. Most of them honest, dedicated people doing hard work in difficult conditions. But somewhere in this machinery, there were always a few who saw opportunities for profit, who exploited trust for personal gain, who made the system worse for everyone else. And Sarah's job was to find them. It wasn't glamorous work. It didn't involve combat or heroic rescues, but it mattered. Every corrupt officer she exposed was one less person stealing from honest soldiers. Every case she built was a brick in the wall, protecting institutional integrity. Frank had taught her that honor mattered more than career advancement, that doing the right thing was its own reward, that sometimes you had to be willing to lose everything to save what mattered most. She'd learned those lessons in the Devil's Anvil, watching Frank survive the impossible through sheer, stubborn integrity. And now she was paying those lessons forward. Fort Bragg. 1 year after the Matthias investigation, Sarah stood in Colonel Hayes' office, now decorated with the trappings of her recent promotion to Brigadier General. Hayes had been rewarded for her role in the Matthias case with a star and command of the entire corruption task force. "At ease, Captain," Hayes said, gesturing to a chair. "I have news. The Black River case went to trial last month. All 3 executives were convicted. They're facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison." "That's excellent news." "It is, and it's largely because of your investigation. The evidence you collected was airtight. The defense couldn't poke holes in it." Hayes pulled out a folder. "Which brings me to why I called you here. Your performance over the last year has been exceptional. 7 major investigations, all resulting in prosecutions. You've developed a reputation as someone who's thorough, fair, and incorruptible. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, because I'm about to make your life more complicated. Hayes slid the folder across the desk. We've received credible allegations of corruption in the special operations community. Multiple units, multiple theaters, going back at least 5 years. But the allegations are vague, the witnesses are scared, and the targets are some of the most decorated soldiers in the Army. Sarah opened the folder and started reading. It was worse than Hayes had described. Allegations of war crimes covered up, illegal weapons sales, unauthorized operations, and the names involved read like a who's who of Special Operations Command. This is a nightmare, Sarah said quietly. It is, and it needs someone who won't be intimidated by rank or reputation. Someone who'll follow the evidence wherever it leads. Hayes leaned forward. I'm assigning this to you. You'll have full support from this office. But you need to understand, this investigation will make you powerful enemies. People who built their careers in the shadows and don't take kindly to light being shown on their activities. Sarah thought about Matthias and his contractors, about the men who'd hunted her and Frank through the desert, about all the soldiers whose careers had been destroyed for speaking truth to power. When do I start? She asked. Hayes smiled. That's what I wanted to hear. You start tomorrow. But first, there's someone here who wants to see you. She stood and opened her office door. Frank Miller walked in, moving easily now, no cane in sight. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, but carried himself with the bearing of a soldier. Heard you were taking on the big boys, he said. Figured I'd stop by and make sure you hadn't lost your mind. Frank! Sarah stood and embraced him. What are you doing here? Well, I retired last month with full benefits. Got my 30 years in, got my pension, got my government-issued "Thank you for your service" certificate, he grinned. And then I got bored. So General Hayes here made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Sarah looked at Hayes. You hired him? As a consultant. Turns out Master Sergeant Miller has institutional knowledge about special operations that we desperately need. And he's got experience surviving what happens when you go after powerful people. Hayes gestured to the folder. He'll be working with you on this investigation. Frank's grin widened. Looks like you're stuck with me again, Valkyrie. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Having Frank as a partner again felt right. They'd been through hell together. They understood each other's strengths and weaknesses. And most importantly, they shared the same code. Evidence before politics, truth before career, integrity before everything. When do we start? Sarah asked. Tomorrow, Hayes said. You'll fly to Fort Benning to interview the first witness, a former SF operator who claims he witnessed unauthorized operations in Syria. He's scared, possibly traumatized, and definitely at risk if the people he's accusing find out he's talking. Protection? We'll arrange it, but first you need to establish trust. Convince him that coming forward won't destroy his life the way it almost destroyed Frank's. Frank nodded. I can help with that. Nothing builds trust like showing them someone who survived the process. Sarah looked at the folder again. The investigation would take months, maybe years. The targets were powerful and well-connected. The evidence would be hard to find and harder to prove. And at the end of it, she'd probably have a dozen new enemies and 0 new friends. But somewhere out there were soldiers like Frank, people who'd seen wrong and wanted to report it, but were too scared of the consequences. People who needed to know that the system could still work, that justice was still possible, that speaking truth to power didn't always end in disaster. She owed it to them to try. Okay, Sarah said, let's do this. Fort Benning, Georgia, 2 days later. The witness met them in a secure conference room in the JAG building. Sergeant First Class David Torres, 32 years old, 8 years in Special Forces, currently on administrative leave pending investigation. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly as he held a coffee cup. "Sergeant Torres," Sarah said, sitting down across from him. "I'm Captain Vance. This is Mr. Miller, our consultant. We're here to talk about what you saw in Syria." Torres looked at Frank. "Miller? Like Master Sergeant Frank Miller? From the Matthias case?" "The same," Frank said, "though I'm retired now, just a civilian trying to help. I followed that case. What they did to you, leaving you out there, trying to kill you, it's why I finally decided to come forward." Torres set down his coffee cup. "I've been holding on to this for 2 years, too scared to say anything. But after seeing that even a general could be held accountable, I thought maybe the system would protect you," Sarah finished. "That's why we're here, to listen to your story and make sure you're protected." Torres took a deep breath and started talking. He'd been part of a special operations team conducting raids in Syria, standard counterterrorism work, hit compounds, capture or kill high-value targets, collect intelligence. But 6 months into his deployment, his team commander had started adding unauthorized operations to their schedule. "We do our regular mission," Torres explained. "Then, instead of going back to base, we'd hit a second target, usually a warehouse or compound that wasn't on any target list. We'd go in, secure the location, and wait while contractors showed up with trucks. They'd load up whatever was inside and drive off." "What were they taking?" Sarah asked. "Everything. Weapons, ammunition, vehicles. One time we secured a compound full of computers and telecommunications equipment. Another time, it was medical supplies." Torres's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "I asked my team leader what was going on. He said it was need to know, and I didn't need to know. Just follow orders." "But you didn't," Frank said. "No. I started taking pictures with my phone, documenting the trucks, the contractors, the locations, because something felt wrong. These weren't sanctioned operations, and the contractors weren't Americans, they were local guys, probably working for whoever was paying the most." "What happened when you tried to report it?" Torres's face went pale. "My team leader found out I was asking questions, called me into his office and told me that if I knew what was good for me, I'd forget everything I'd seen. Said accidents happen in combat, and it would be a shame if I had one." Sarah felt anger building in her chest, the same pattern as Matthias in Harwick. Threaten the witness, protect the corruption, maintain the illusion. "Did you get the photos out?" she asked. Torres pulled out a thumb drive. "Everything's on here. Dates, locations, photos, even some audio recordings I made. It's all encrypted, and I've kept 3 copies in different locations. I figured if something happened to me, at least the evidence would survive." Frank reached over and squeezed Torres's shoulder. "You did good, Sergeant. Real good. Now you need to let us do our job and protect you." "How?" "My team leader is a lieutenant colonel with 20 years of service and 2 silver stars. Who's going to believe a sergeant against him?" "We will," Sarah said. "Because we have something he doesn't. We have the evidence, and evidence doesn't lie." The investigation took 6 months. Sarah and Frank worked methodically, using Torres's evidence as a roadmap. They identified the contractors, traced the stolen equipment, and found more witnesses, other soldiers who'd seen suspicious operations but been too scared to report them. The case expanded beyond just one team. They found a network of special operations officers who'd been running off-book operations for years, using combat deployments as cover for theft and smuggling. The stolen equipment was being sold to the highest bidder, sometimes to allies, sometimes to groups the U.S. was supposedly fighting. It was Matthias all over again, but worse. More organized, more entrenched, more dangerous. Sarah presented her findings to General Hayes in a secure briefing room at Fort Bragg. Frank sat beside her, his role having evolved from consultant to full investigative partner. "This is extensive," Hayes said, reviewing the evidence on her laptop. You're talking about prosecuting 15 officers, including 3 colonels and a brigadier general. The legal battle alone will take years. I know, Sarah said, but the evidence is solid. We have documentation, witness testimony, financial records. This isn't speculation, it's fact. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. Then she closed the laptop and looked at Sarah directly. Captain, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Are you sure about this? Because once we file these charges, there's no going back. These officers have friends, powerful friends. They'll come after you with everything they have. Your career, your reputation, maybe even your safety. All of it will be at risk. Sarah glanced at Frank, who nodded slightly. They discussed this possibility many times over the last 6 months. General, a year and a half ago I went into a desert to look for a man everyone said was a coward and a deserter. I found him half dead, surrounded by evidence of massive corruption, being hunted by contractors paid to kill him. We barely survived getting that evidence out. She leaned forward. Since then, I've learned that corruption in the military isn't an aberration. It's a persistent cancer that requires constant vigilance to combat. And I've learned that the only way to fight it is to be willing to pay the price that comes with standing up for what's right. Even if that price is your career, even if it's my career, because I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, not to protect corrupt officers, not to look the other way when I see crimes being committed, to defend the Constitution and the principles it represents. Hayes smiled. That's what I thought you'd say. She opened her laptop again. Okay, I'll forward this to JAG and start the prosecution process. It's going to be a fight. We're ready, Frank said. We've been training for this fight our whole careers. The prosecutions dominated military news for the next year. 15 officers charged with everything from theft and smuggling to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The trials were public, the evidence damning, and the verdicts mostly guilty. The brigadier general got 15 years at Leavenworth. The colonels got 10 to 12. The junior officers received lesser sentences in exchange for cooperation. And throughout it all, Sarah and Frank served as the prosecution's key investigators, providing testimony, explaining evidence, and refusing to be intimidated by defense attorneys who tried to paint them as crusaders with a vendetta. The media called it the largest corruption scandal in special operations history. Congress held hearings. The Pentagon implemented new oversight procedures. And gradually, the message spread. Corruption would not be tolerated no matter who committed it. But the personal cost was real. Sarah received death threats. Her car was vandalized. Someone tried to hack her email and social media accounts. And at work, certain officers who'd been friends with the convicted gave her cold shoulders and veiled warnings to be careful who you go after next. Frank dealt with his own backlash. His consulting contract was protested by veterans groups who saw the prosecutions as attacks on the special operations community. He received angry letters and phone calls accusing him of betraying his fellow soldiers. Through it all, they supported each other. Weekly calls, monthly visits when schedules allowed, reminders that they were doing the right thing, that the temporary hate was worth the long-term change. 2 years after the Matthias investigation, Sarah was promoted to major. General Hayes personally pinned on her oak leaves. "You've made more enemies than any major I've ever known," Hayes said during the ceremony. "You've also done more to restore integrity to this institution than most generals accomplish in entire careers. I'm proud to have you on my team." Sarah looked out at the small gathering who'd come to her promotion ceremony. Frank was there, of course, standing in the front row. Colonel Chen from the investigators course. A few other officers from the task force. Sergeant Torres, who'd finished his enlistment and was transitioning to civilian life, but had flown in for the ceremony. Small crowd, but good people. People who valued integrity over politics, truth over convenience, justice over expediency. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah said. I'm honored to serve." After the ceremony, Frank pulled her aside. "Major Vance," he said with a grin, "has a nice ring to it. Feels weird. I keep expecting someone to call me Captain. You'll get used to it, and you'll keep climbing. I wouldn't be surprised if you're a colonel in 5 years. If I survive that long. You will. You're too stubborn to die, and too smart to let the bastards win." He handed her a small box. "I got you something." Sarah opened it. Inside was a rock, smooth, red, about the size of her palm. The kind of rock found all over the Devil's Anvil. "I went back there last month," Frank explained. "Hired a guide, drove out to where I'd been hiding. Wanted to see it one more time now that I wasn't running for my life." "How was it?" "Hot, miserable, beautiful in a desolate kind of way." He pointed at the rock. "I picked that up near where you found me. Figured you should have it. A reminder that we survived, that we beat impossible odds, and that sometimes the hardest terrain produces the strongest people." Sarah closed her hand around the rock. It was warm from sitting in Frank's pocket, smooth from millennia of wind and sand. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For teaching me. For trusting me. For being the kind of soldier I want to be." "You're already that soldier, Valkyrie. You proved it when you came looking for me. Everything since then has just been confirmation." He smiled. "Now come on. I heard Hayes is taking us to dinner to celebrate, and I'm hungry enough to eat an entire cow." They walked to the parking lot together, talking about the next investigation, about Frank's latest physical therapy milestones, about whether Sarah would ever take a real vacation. Behind them, the sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that reminded Sarah of desert canyons and impossible odds and the kind of courage that emerges when everything else is stripped away. She'd gone into that desert a captain looking for a missing sergeant. She'd come out a soldier who understood what integrity really meant. And in the 2 years since, she'd built a career on that foundation, not of rank or medals or career advancement, but of doing the right thing even when it cost her everything. Frank had taught her that lesson by living it, and she'd spend the rest of her career teaching it to others. 5 years later, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vance stood at a podium in the auditorium at the Army War College, looking out at 200 mid-career officers attending the annual Ethics Symposium. "5 years ago," she began, "I was a captain investigating what I thought was a simple case of a soldier who'd gone AWOL. What I found instead was one of the largest corruption scandals in modern military history, and a man who'd sacrificed everything to expose it." She clicked to the next slide. It showed a photo of the Devil's Anvil, red canyons stretching endlessly under a brutal sun. Master Sergeant Frank Miller spent 4 months hiding in terrain that should have killed him. He survived on contaminated water, with a broken leg, hunted by contractors paid to ensure he never made it home. And he did all of that because he believed that telling the truth mattered more than preserving his career. Another slide. This one showed Frank receiving the Soldier's Medal for his actions. He stood at attention, older but unbowed, as a general pinned the award to his chest. The easy thing would have been to look the other way, to accept the official story that Miller had deserted, to let the corruption continue because investigating it was dangerous and inconvenient. Sarah paused. But the easy thing is rarely the right thing. She told them about the investigation, about finding Frank, about the contractors in the helicopter hunt and the desperate climb up the mesa, about evidence and prosecution and justice finally served. "I tell you this story not to make myself or Sergeant Miller sound heroic," she continued, "but to illustrate a fundamental truth about military service. Integrity is not optional. It's not something you practice when it's convenient. It's the foundation everything else is built on." She advanced to another slide, showing statistics. Investigations opened, prosecutions completed, corruption exposed. Since the Matthias case, The Inspector General's Corruption Task Force has investigated over 200 cases of military fraud, theft, and abuse of power. We've recovered millions in stolen equipment and funds. We've held officers and contractors accountable for their crimes. And we've sent a clear message. No rank is too high to face justice. A final slide appeared. It showed the rock Frank had given her, sitting on her desk next to her rank insignia. This rock came from the Devil's Anvil, from the place where Sergeant Miller nearly died because he refused to compromise his principles. I keep it as a reminder that integrity isn't measured in comfort or convenience. It's measured in the hard choices we make when everything is on the line. She looked out at the audience. All of you will face moments in your careers where you have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between preserving your advancement and preserving your honor, between protecting powerful people and protecting the institution you swore to defend. I can't tell you what choice to make, but I can tell you this. If you choose integrity, if you choose truth, if you choose to stand up when it would be easier to look away, you won't be alone. There are people throughout this army who believe the same things you do, who will support you, protect you, and fight alongside you. She gestured to the back of the auditorium where Frank sat, listening with a slight smile. Sergeant Miller taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. He taught me that institutions are only as strong as the people willing to defend their principles. And he taught me that sometimes the hardest terrain produces the strongest soldiers. Sarah closed her presentation. Thank you for your time. I'll be available afterward if anyone has questions. The applause started slowly, then built. Officers stood, one by one, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Afterwards, Sarah stood in the lobby answering questions. Young captains and majors, asking how to handle suspicious activity in their units, how to report corruption without destroying their careers, how to be brave when the system seems stacked against them. To each one, she gave the same advice. Document everything. Find trustworthy people. Follow the evidence. Don't give up. Frank joined her when the crowd finally thinned. He walked with barely a trace of a limp now, the result of years of dedicated physical therapy. Good speech, he said. Very inspiring. I almost teared up. Liar. You never cry. I cried plenty in that damn crevice, just didn't have an audience. They walked outside into the cool Pennsylvania evening. The War College campus was beautiful this time of year, trees changing colors, air crisp and clean. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't come looking for you? Sarah asked. Every day. I'd probably be bones in the desert, and Matthias would still be stealing. Frank looked at her. But you did come, because you're the kind of officer who doesn't leave soldiers behind, who doesn't accept easy answers, who believes that people deserve better than corruption and lies. You taught me that. Maybe, but you already had it in you. I just gave you an opportunity to prove it. They reached Sarah's car. She'd driven up from Fort Bragg that morning, a 3-hour trip she'd made dozens of times over the years. Frank, she said, thank you for everything, for teaching me, for surviving, for being the kind of soldier I wanted to be. You're welcome. But Sarah, you need to understand something. You're not following in my footsteps anymore. You're making your own path, a better path, one that's going to inspire the next generation the same way watching you inspired me to keep fighting. Sarah felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't let it go to your head. You're still just a lieutenant colonel. I've known privates with more common sense. She laughed and punched his shoulder. There's the Frank I know. Always, he opened her car door for her. Drive safe, and Sarah, I'm proud of you, every damn day. She drove back to Fort Bragg as the sun set, painting the sky in shades that reminded her of the desert, of impossible survival and unlikely victory, of a sergeant who refused to quit and a captain who refused to give up looking. The rock from the Devil's Anvil sat on her dashboard, a permanent reminder of where she'd come from and what she'd learned. Integrity wasn't easy. It wasn't convenient. It often came with a price that seemed too high to pay, but it was the only path worth walking. And as long as she had soldiers like Frank Miller showing the way, she'd keep walking it, one difficult step at a time, through whatever terrain lay ahead. Because that's what soldiers did. They survived. They adapted. They overcame. And when everything else was stripped away, when the only thing left was the choice between right and wrong, they chose right every single time.